a dying cop, a mafia boss. One choice that breaks every rule. Blood pools under flickering streetlight. Detective Lena Cross lies gasping in a forgotten alley, betrayed by her own badge. Adrian Voss, the city's most dangerous crime lord, stumbles upon her broken body during his midnight walk. One look could destroy his empire. One choice could cost him everything. But when their eyes meet in that moment between life and death, something impossible happens. The man who built his world on ruthless decisions refuses to let her die. Welcome to a story of enemies, corruption, and the thin line between justice and survival. Drop a comment with your city below. Let's see how far this tale travels. And if you're ready for 2 hours of tension you won't forget, hit that like button and let's begin. The warehouse district smelled like rust and regret. Adrian Voss walked alone through streets that belonged to shadows, his expensive Italian shoes clicking against cracked pavement with the steady rhythm of a man who owned the night. The meeting had gone to hell 3 hours ago, shipment routes compromised, distribution networks exposed, partners demanding answers he didn't have. Every careful plan he'd constructed over 15 years threatened to collapse like a house of cards in a hurricane. He needed air, space, distance from the suffocating pressure of maintaining an empire built on secrets and fear. The September wind cut through his tailored suit, but Adrian welcomed the cold. It sharpened his thoughts, cleared away the noise of voices demanding, threatening, questioning his authority. At 42, he'd survived longer than most men in his profession by trusting his instincts and maintaining absolute control. Tonight, that control felt like sand slipping through his fingers. "You're losing your edge, Voss." Marcus Chen's words echoed in his mind. His oldest associate had said it quietly, privately, after the others left. Not a threat. Marcus didn't make threats. A warning. The families are watching. They smell blood in the water. Adrian's jaw tightened. Let them watch. He'd built this organization from nothing, transformed scattered street operations into a sophisticated network that moved millions through the city's veins without leaving fingerprints. He wasn't some aging relic clinging to past glory. He was Adrian Voss, and Adrian Voss didn't break. But even he had to admit the walls were closing in. Federal task forces, ambitious prosecutors, internal challenges from younger, hungrier wolves who thought ruthlessness was the same as intelligence. And now, somehow, someone had leaked information about tonight's shipment. Someone close. Someone he trusted. The thought made his blood run cold. Adrian turned down a narrow alley between two abandoned textile factories, shortcuts he'd memorized years ago when these streets represented territory to be claimed rather than empires to be defended. The overhead lights had died months ago, leaving only the occasional spill of illumination from distant street lamps. His eyes adjusted to the darkness automatically, instincts honed by decades of surviving in spaces where weakness meant death. Halfway through the alley, he heard it, breathing. Shallow, desperate, wet. Adrian stopped, every muscle tensing. His hand moved toward the shoulder holster beneath his jacket, a Sig Sauer P226 he'd carried for 12 years and never fired in anger. In his world, guns were last resorts. Intelligence, planning, leverage, those were his weapons. But sometimes, last resorts became necessities. The breathing came again, ragged and fading. Against every survival instinct screaming at him to walk away, Adrian moved toward the sound. His eyes tracked the source to a crumpled form beneath a flickering streetlight at the alley's edge, half hidden behind a dumpster that reeked of rotting produce and industrial waste. A woman. She lay sprawled on the concrete, dark blood spreading beneath her torso in a pool that reflected the stuttering light like some grotesque mirror. Her clothing, dark pants, a torn white shirt, was soaked crimson. One arm reached toward nothing, fingers twitching with fading life. Her face, pale as death itself, turned slightly toward the sound of his approaching footsteps. Their eyes met. Adrian's breath caught. Even bleeding out, even dying, there was something in those eyes. Defiance, determination, a refusal to surrender that he recognized because he saw it in his own mirror every morning. This wasn't some random victim. This was someone who fought, someone who struggled, someone who refused to go quietly into that final darkness. Then he saw the badge. It lay a few feet away, knocked loose from her belt during whatever violence had put her here. The metal caught the light. and Adrian's entire body went rigid. Police. Every rational thought screamed at him to leave, to turn around, walk away, forget he ever saw this woman dying in an alley that would claim her body by morning. Getting involved with law enforcement was suicide. Even helping a dying cop could unravel everything, raise questions, invite investigations, connect him to a scene that would bring the full weight of the department down on his organization. He should walk away. He took a step backward. The woman's eyes followed him, still conscious somehow, still aware despite the blood loss that should have claimed her minutes ago. Her lips moved, forming words he couldn't hear. Her hand, trembling, desperate, reached toward him, not pleading, not begging, asking. Adrian stood frozen, watching her die, watching those eyes refuse to close, refuse to give up even as her life drained onto cold concrete. Something in that moment cracked through the armor he'd built around himself. Something he'd thought dead years ago when he made his first deal, his first compromise, his first choice to step into the darkness. Humanity. Fuck, he whispered. Adrian crossed the distance in 3 strides, dropping to his knees beside her. His hands moved automatically, years of emergency training from his army days flooding back. He pressed his palm against the wound in her abdomen, gunshot, through and through, the exit wound worse than the entrance. Blood pulsed between his fingers, warm and sticky. "Stay with me," he said, his voice rough. "Look at me. Keep your eyes open." She did. Those eyes, gray-blue, like storm clouds, locked onto his with an intensity that defied her dying body. "Who did this?" Adrian demanded, applying pressure even as he knew it was likely useless. The bullet had done too much damage. She needed a trauma surgeon, needed blood transfusions, needed a miracle. "Talk to me. Who shot you?" Her lips moved. He leaned closer. "Partner." The word came out as barely a whisper, carried on breath that rattled in her chest. "My partner." Adrian's mind raced. Cop shot by her own partner. That meant internal corruption. That meant cover-up. That meant whoever left her here to die would be watching, would be making sure she stayed dead, would eliminate anyone who interfered with that outcome. Getting involved was worse than suicide. It was war. He pulled out his phone, thumb hovering over the emergency call button. One call. Anonymous tip. Leave her for the paramedics and disappear into the night. Let the system handle its own. The woman's hand suddenly gripped his wrist with surprising strength, her eyes widening. She shook her head fractionally, blood bubbling at the corner of her mouth. "No. Hospital." Another rattling breath. "They'll finish it." Understanding crashed through Adrian like ice water. She wasn't just shot by her partner. This was an execution. And if she went to a hospital, if she entered the system, whoever wanted her dead would find her, would complete the job. "Then you're going to die right here," Adrian said flatly, still applying pressure to the wound. "You need medical attention, real medical attention." "Have choice." Her eyes held his, somehow still sharp despite the shock ravaging her system. "Let me die, or help me disappear." Adrian stared at her, this dying cop asking a criminal to save her life by pulling her into the shadows. The irony would have been funny if it wasn't so fucking insane. His phone felt heavy in his hand. One call, one choice. Walk away and let her die. Safe, smart, the decision any rational crime boss would make. Or break every rule he'd ever lived by and save the life of a cop. Adrian looked at those eyes still refusing to surrender, at the badge lying in her spreading blood, at his own hands already stained with the evidence of a choice he'd apparently already made without realizing it. "You're going to owe me," he said roughly, pocketing his phone and pulling off his jacket. He pressed the expensive fabric against her wound, ignoring how the blood soaked through immediately. "You're going to owe me everything." A ghost of something, relief, gratitude, desperate hope, flickered across her face before pain claimed it again. Adrian pulled his phone back out, but this time he didn't call 911. He scrolled through his contacts to a name he hadn't used in 8 months. Marcus would kill him for this. The entire organization would consider it insanity. But Adrian had spent 15 years building power and influence precisely so he could make impossible decisions when necessary. This was necessary. He didn't know why, couldn't explain it, but every instinct told him this woman, this dying cop, mattered. The call connected after 2 rings. "I need the facility," Adrian said without preamble. "Full medical team, trauma surgeon, now." "Boss?" The voice on the other end, Diego, one of his most trusted operators, sounded confused. "What kind of situation are we talking about?" "Gunshot victim. Critical condition. Complete discretion required." Is this one of ours?" Adrian looked down at the woman, at the badge, at eyes watching him with fading awareness. "Just get the team ready. I'm 15 minutes out." He ended the call before Diego could ask more questions, then looked at the woman. "I'm going to move you. It's going to hurt like hell. If you pass out, that's probably better." She nodded fractionally. Adrian shifted position, sliding one arm beneath her shoulders and the other under her knees. The woman's face contorted with agony as he lifted her, a choked gasp escaping her lips. Fresh blood poured from the wound, and Adrian felt it soaking through his shirt, hot against his skin. "Stay conscious," he ordered, carrying her toward the alley's entrance, where he'd left his car 3 blocks away. "Talk to me. What's your name?" "Lena?" she breathed out. "Detective Lena Cross?" "Well, Detective Lena Cross, I'm Adrian Voss, and I'm probably going to regret saving your life." "Already regretting not dying?" A painful attempt at humor in her voice despite the shock. Adrian almost smiled. Almost. "Save your strength for staying alive. We've got a complicated conversation ahead of us once you're not bleeding to death." He moved through the shadows quickly, checking corners automatically, scanning for witnesses or surveillance. At 3 a.m, the warehouse district was deserted, but years of caution had taught him to assume eyes everywhere. Carrying a bleeding cop through city streets wasn't exactly subtle. His car, a black Mercedes S-Class, understated but powerful, sat where he'd left it under a broken streetlight. Adrian had chosen the spot deliberately, avoiding cameras and light. Now that paranoid caution served an entirely different purpose. He managed to get the passenger door open while still holding Lena, then carefully lowered her onto the leather seat. She'd lost consciousness somewhere during the walk, her head lolling against the headrest, face sheet white. Blood covered his hands, his clothes, the interior of his car. Adrian reached across her to buckle the seatbelt, useless if she bled out before they arrived, but instinct demanded it, then circled to the driver's side. The engine purred to life. Expensive German engineering responding instantly. He pulled away from the curb without headlights, waiting until he'd cleared 2 blocks before turning them on. The facility was 12 minutes away if he pushed it. Adrian pushed it. He drove in silence, one hand on the wheel, the other checking Lena's pulse every 30 seconds. Weak, thready, but still there. Still fighting. Her right hand had fallen open, revealing calluses consistent with firearms training. Her nails were short, practical. No wedding ring. A watch on her left wrist, digital, cheap, functional. Everything about her screamed cop, from the utilitarian clothing to the way she'd looked at him even while dying, assessing, analyzing, refusing to show fear. "Don't die," Adrian said quietly, taking a corner faster than advisable. "You wanted to disappear. Can't disappear if you're dead." No response. Her breathing had become shallow, barely visible. Adrian's jaw clenched. He'd seen death before, caused it, witnessed it, cleaned up after it. But this felt different. This was a choice, a responsibility he'd taken on voluntarily. If she died, it would be because he'd failed, because his decision to involve himself hadn't been enough. The facility appeared ahead, an old medical building he'd acquired through shell companies 3 years ago. Officially abandoned, scheduled for demolition. In reality, it served as emergency medical treatment for operations that couldn't risk hospital questions. Gunshot wounds that needed to stay off police radar. Injuries that would trigger mandatory reporting. Adrian had installed a full surgical suite, hired doctors willing to work off the books for obscene amounts of money, and maintained it as insurance against exactly this kind of situation. Though he'd never imagined using it to save a cop. He pulled into the underground garage where Diego waited with 2 others. Maria, a trauma surgeon who'd lost her license over drug addiction but maintained skills that rivaled any hospital, and James, a former army medic who asked no questions and remembered nothing. Diego's eyes widened when he saw Lena. "Boss, is that—" "Get her inside," Adrian snapped, already unbuckling her seatbelt. She's lost a lot of blood, gunshot through the abdomen. Maria moved instantly, professional instincts overriding surprise. She helped Adrian lift Lena from the car, and together they rushed toward the medical bay. James wheeled a gurney to meet them, and they transferred Lena's unconscious form onto it. BP is crashing, Maria announced, fingers on Lena's neck. We need to move now. They ran through sterile hallways to the surgical suite, where harsh lights and medical equipment stood ready. Adrian stepped back as Maria and James took over, their movements precise and practiced despite the chaos. Diego pulled him aside, eyes full of questions. Boss, that's a cop, Diego said quietly. I saw the badge. I know what she is. Then why? Because I decided to, Adrian said, his voice carrying the weight of absolute authority. That's all you need to know. Diego studied him for a long moment, then nodded. What do you need? Complete discretion. No one outside this room knows about her. Not Marcus, not the families, no one. The car? Clean it, thoroughly. Burn everything that can't be cleaned. And her? Diego glanced toward the surgical suite where Maria was already cutting away Lena's blood-soaked clothing. What happens when she wakes up? Adrian watched through the observation window as Maria worked to save Lena's life, her hands moving with practiced efficiency despite her own demons. When she wakes up, he said slowly, we're going to have a very interesting conversation about why her own partner tried to kill her. You think this is internal? She told me her partner shot her, told me not to take her to a hospital because they'd finished the job. Adrian's eyes never left the operating table. Someone in her department wants her dead badly enough to execute her in an alley. That's not just corruption, that's cover-up. Diego whistled low. And you brought her here, into our facility, into our world. I made a choice that could burn everything we've built. Adrian finally turned to look at his lieutenant, his expression cold and controlled. I've spent 15 years building this organization. I know exactly what I'm risking. But something's wrong in this city, Diego. Something bigger than territory disputes and distribution networks. If the police are executing their own, if corruption runs deep enough that a detective can't trust her own department, he paused, that affects us. That affects everyone who operates in the shadows. So this is strategic? Adrian looked back at Lena, at Maria fighting to repair the damage a bullet had done to her internal organs. Let's call it investment in information. She knows something worth killing for. I want to know what that is. It wasn't entirely a lie, but it also wasn't entirely the truth. The surgery took 4 hours. Adrian watched all of it from the observation window, refusing to leave, refusing to rest. He saw Maria's hands move with practiced precision, saw her face tighten when she discovered the bullet had nicked Lena's liver, saw her work to repair the damage while James maintained blood pressure and administered transfusions from their off-book supply. Dawn broke outside, light filtering through reinforced windows that had been modified to prevent outside observation. In the surgical suite, Maria finally stepped back, pulling off bloodied gloves. She emerged 10 minutes later, exhaustion written across her face. She'll live, Maria said without preamble. Barely. Another 10 minutes and she would have bled out completely. As it is, she lost over 3 liters of blood. The bullet did extensive damage: liver laceration, perforated intestine, torn mesenteric artery. I've repaired what I can, but she's going to need weeks of recovery and careful monitoring. But she'll survive, Adrian confirmed. If infection doesn't set in, if her organs don't fail, if she doesn't develop complications. Maria fixed him with a hard stare. She's not out of danger, Adrian, not by a long shot. But you saved her. For now. Maria's expression shifted, professional curiosity replacing exhaustion. Who is she? And why are we saving a cop? That's complicated. Everything with you is complicated. Maria pulled off her surgical cap, revealing sweat-dampened hair. But this is different. This woman almost died. Someone wanted her dead, and now you've made her our problem. My problem, Adrian corrected. You did your job. The rest is my concern. Maria studied him with eyes that had seen too much darkness, made too many compromises. You're changing, Adrian. I've worked for you for 3 years, and I've never seen you take a risk like this. Not for anyone outside the organization. People change. Not people like us. But she didn't push further. She's in recovery room 2. She'll be unconscious for a while. I've got her sedated to manage pain and let her body stabilize. When she wakes up, Maria paused. She's going to have questions. I'll have answers. Will you? Maria turned to leave, then stopped. Be careful, Adrian. Saving her life doesn't make her trust you. And a cop with questions is dangerous, even one you pulled from death's door. She left, leaving Adrian alone with Diego and the sound of medical equipment beeping steadily from the recovery room. You want me to post security? Diego asked. No, she's not a prisoner. Adrian started toward the recovery room. But monitor the exits. If she runs when she wakes up, I want to know. You think she'll run? I think she's a cop who woke up in a criminal's medical facility after being shot by her own partner. Running seems like a reasonable response. Diego nodded and headed toward the security station. Adrian continued to recovery room 2, where Lena lay on a hospital bed connected to monitors and IVs, her skin pale against white sheets. Someone had cleaned the blood from her face and hands. In the harsh medical lighting, she looked young, early 30s, he guessed, and vulnerable in a way that seemed fundamentally wrong for someone who'd stared down death with such defiance. Adrian pulled a chair close to the bed and sat, studying the woman he'd chosen to save. Her file would make interesting reading, assuming he could access it without raising flags. Detective Lena Cross, shot by her own partner, left to die in an alley, but still alive because a mafia boss made an inexplicable decision. What were you investigating? Adrian asked the unconscious woman. What did you find that was worth executing you over? The monitors beeped their steady rhythm. Lena's chest rose and fell with shallow breaths. Outside, morning traffic would be starting, the city waking up to another day of commerce and crime, justice and corruption, all the intertwined systems that kept the machinery running. And somewhere in that city, someone believed they'd successfully eliminated a problem. Adrian's eyes hardened. They were wrong. He stayed in the recovery room for another hour, watching over Lena like some kind of guardian. It was absurd, irrational. He should be dealing with the fallout from last night's failed meeting, tracking down the leak in his organization, shoring up relationships with partners who'd started to question his authority. Instead, he sat beside a cop's hospital bed, waiting for her to wake up so they could have what would undoubtedly be the most complicated conversation of his life. His phone buzzed. Marcus. Where the hell are you? His oldest associate's voice carried worry and frustration in equal measure. You disappeared last night. No one's heard from you. The families are asking questions. I had something to handle. What kind of something makes you go dark for 8 hours? Adrian glanced at Lena. A complication. What kind of complication? The kind we'll discuss in person. Clear my schedule for today. I'll be unavailable. Adrian, you can't just... I can, and I am. Handle the families. Tell them I'm dealing with the leak personally. Are you? In a manner of speaking. Adrian stood, moving toward the window where he could see the city stretching beyond. Marcus, I need complete discretion on something. No questions, no exceptions. A pause. How bad? Potentially catastrophic if handled wrong. Potentially revolutionary if handled right. You're being cryptic. I'm being careful. Trust me for now. I'll explain everything when I can. Marcus sighed. You know I trust you, Adrian. I have for 20 years. But whatever you're into, be careful. You've got enemies circling, looking for any weakness. I know exactly what's circling. Adrian ended the call and returned to his vigil beside Lena's bed. Hours passed. Medical staff, carefully vetted, highly compensated, absolutely discreet, came and went, checking vitals, adjusting medications, ensuring Lena's recovery proceeded without complications. Maria appeared twice, examining her patient with professional thoroughness before declaring the surgery holding. She should wake up soon, Maria said during her second visit. I'm reducing the sedation. Her body needs to start fighting on its own. Adrian nodded. I'll be here when she does. To answer her questions? To ask my own. Maria left and Adrian settled back into his chair. Outside, afternoon sun painted the city in gold and shadow. Inside, machines beeped their eternal rhythm, counting heartbeats, measuring the distance between life and death. Lena's eyes opened at 3:47 p.m. Adrian saw the moment consciousness returned, the subtle shift in her breathing, the flutter of eyelids, the tension entering her body as awareness crashed through the fog of sedation and pain. Her eyes focused on the ceiling, then swept the room with practiced efficiency. Exits, windows, equipment, threats. When her gaze finally landed on Adrian sitting beside her bed, every muscle in her body went rigid despite the medical equipment tethering her in place.
"Easy," Adrian said quietly, not moving from his chair. "You're safe." Lena's hand moved toward where her weapon should be, finding only hospital sheets. Her eyes widened, then narrowed, a dozen calculations flashing across her face in seconds. When she spoke, her voice came out rough from intubation and disuse. "Where am I?" "Private medical facility." "Whose?" "Mine." Understanding and horror warred in her expression. She tried to sit up, gasping as pain lanced through her abdomen. Adrian moved instinctively to help, but she recoiled from his touch. "Don't—" Lena's hand went to the wound, finding bandages and surgical tape. Her breathing quickened, pain and panic mixing. You're Adrian Voss," he supplied calmly. "And before you finish that thought, remember I'm the one who saved your life. You're a criminal." Accusation and confusion in equal measure. "Yes, I'm a cop. I'm aware." "Then why—" She stopped, memory flooding back. The alley, the blood, the badge. Her eyes found his, and he saw the moment she recalled their conversation while she was dying. "My partner, he— Oh God." "Shot you," Adrian finished. "Left you in an alley to bleed out. You asked me not to take you to a hospital because whoever wanted you dead would finish the job." Lena's face cycled through emotions: betrayal, grief, rage, fear, before settling into the same defiant determination he'd seen in that alley. "How long have I been here?" 15 hours. "You came through surgery 4 hours ago." "Surgery?" She looked down at herself, at the monitors and IVs, at the sterile medical room that was definitely not a public hospital. "You brought me to your facility, saved my life with your doctors." "Yes." "Why?" Adrian leaned back in his chair, studying the woman who'd already proven far more composed than most people would be in her situation. "That's an excellent question, one I've been asking myself for the past 15 hours, and I don't have a good answer." He met her eyes directly. "Every logical instinct told me to walk away. Getting involved with a dying cop could destroy everything I've built. But I made a choice." "Based on what?" "Based on the fact that you refused to give up even while bleeding to death. Based on the fact that your own partner tried to execute you. Based on—" He paused, considering. "Instinct, I suppose." Lena watched him with eyes that saw too much, analyzed too deeply. Criminals don't operate on instinct. They operate on profit and power. "Is that what they teach you at the academy?" "That's what 15 years investigating men like you has taught me." Adrian smiled slightly. "Then consider this an exception to your rule, Detective Cross." She flinched at the use of her name. "How do you— You told me, in the alley, before I brought you here." "I told you," Lena's eyes widened. "I told you my partner shot me." "Yes. And you still saved me, knowing that helping me would bring you into direct conflict with law enforcement corruption." "I saved you because I decided to. The complications are something I'll handle." Lena stared at him, and Adrian could practically see her mind working, analyzing angles, calculating risks, trying to understand the impossible situation she'd woken into. "This doesn't make sense. Men like you don't take risks like this without reason." "Maybe I'm not like other men. Or maybe you see an opportunity." Suspicion crept into her voice. "A cop in your debt. Information about police corruption. Leverage against the department." Adrian couldn't help but admire her quick thinking, even while bleeding and sedated and trapped in enemy territory. "If that's what I wanted, I could have let you die and simply taken your badge, your identification, whatever evidence you were carrying. Would have been cleaner, safer. Then what do you want?" "Right now? I want you to survive, to recover, to tell me why your own partner tried to kill you." He leaned forward. "Because I suspect, Detective Cross, that whatever you were investigating is bigger than either of us realizes. And in my experience, when cops start executing cops, it means corruption that affects everyone. including those of us who operate outside the law. Lena's jaw tightened. You want information. I want truth. There's a difference. Not in my experience. Then this should be an educational experience for both of us. They stared at each other across the gulf between their worlds, cop and criminal, law and lawlessness, order and chaos. But in that moment, Adrian saw something shift in Lena's eyes. Not trust, not yet, but recognition. Understanding that their situations had become impossibly, inexplicably intertwined. I can't trust you, Lena said finally. I know. You can't trust me. I'm aware. But I'm alive because you chose to save me. Yes. Lena's hand moved to her wound again, touching the bandages that represented a choice that shouldn't have been made. My partner's name is Derek Kane. 8 years working together. I trusted him with my life. What changed? I started noticing things. Evidence disappearing, cases getting buried, witnesses recanting, always on cases involving specific targets, businesses, individuals, operations. Her eyes met his. Your operations, Mr.
Voss. Adrian's expression remained neutral. Interesting. I thought maybe I was imagining it, seeing patterns where none existed. But then I started digging deeper, tracking the money, following the connections. Lena's voice grew stronger despite her physical weakness. What I found was worse than simple corruption. It's systematic, organized, multiple officers across multiple precincts, all protecting the same network. My network. Your network. Among others. Adrian processed this, pieces clicking into place. You found evidence. Enough to bring down a dozen cops. Maybe more. Bitterness crept into her voice. I was going to take it to internal affairs, to the DA. I thought I could trust Derek, that he'd help me expose it. Instead, he tried to kill you. Instead, he drove me to that alley and put 2 bullets in me. Her hand trembled slightly. The first shot, I was so shocked I didn't even react. The second one, I managed to move, but he left me there, Mr. Voss. Left me bleeding out, confident I'd be dead before anyone found me. Where's the evidence? Lena's eyes sharpened. Why? So you can destroy it? Protect your organization? If I wanted the evidence destroyed, I would have searched you while you were unconscious and taken whatever you had. Adrian's voice remained calm. I'm asking because if your partner thinks you died with that evidence, you have a very narrow window before they realize you survived and come looking. Horror dawned on Lena's face. The facility. They'll trace... This facility doesn't exist on any official records. The building is scheduled for demolition. There's no paper trail leading here. He paused. But if they find your body missing, if they start looking, if you surface anywhere in the system, they'll know I survived. Lena's breathing quickened, pain and panic mixing. They'll come for me. They'll finish it. Which is why you're going to stay dead. She looked at him sharply. What? As far as the world knows, Detective Lena Cross died in that alley. Your partner believes it. His associates believe it. The corruption you discovered remains buried because the investigator is dead. Adrian leaned forward. That gives us an advantage. Us? You need to survive. I need to understand the scope of corruption protecting operations in this city. Our interests have aligned, Detective, whether either of us likes it or not. You want to use me to infiltrate the corruption, expose the cops protecting your rivals. I want to understand what I'm facing. If police corruption extends to protecting my operations, that means someone's been paying for protection I didn't authorize. That means someone's operating behind my back, using my organization as cover. His eyes hardened. I don't appreciate being used. Lena studied him with an intensity that suggested she was seeing past the surface, analyzing motivations and truthfulness. You're telling me you didn't know about the police corruption? I'm telling you that any protection my organization receives comes from legitimate channels, lawyers, political contributions, carefully managed relationships, not street-level cops taking bribes to bury evidence. That's sloppy, dangerous, and leaves trails. Then someone in your organization went rogue. That's what I intend to find out. Adrian stood, moving to the window. The meeting I was leaving when I found you had gone badly. Information about our operations has been leaking. Shipments compromised. Reliable sources, suddenly unreliable. I thought it was federal pressure or rival organizations. But it could be internal, Lena finished. Someone working with corrupt cops, using your network while feeding information to authorities to undermine you. Precisely. Silence fell between them, heavy with implications. Finally, Lena spoke, her voice careful. If I help you identify the corruption in my department, what happens to that information? What do you want to happen? I want the corrupt cops arrested, prosecuted. I want justice. Even if that justice exposes my operations? Even then, Adrian turned back to face her. You're asking me to facilitate the destruction of my own organization. I'm asking you to choose between protecting criminals and exposing a corruption that's bigger than both of us. Lena's eyes blazed with determination despite her weakness. You saved my life, Mr. Voss. For whatever reason, you chose not to let me die. That choice has consequences. You don't get to save me and then expect me to become your weapon against enemies while protecting the empire you built. Fair enough. Adrian returned to his chair, respecting her directness. Then let's establish terms. You help me identify who in my organization has been operating behind my back. In return, I help you build a case against the corrupt officers that can't be buried or ignored. And your operations? Will face whatever consequences come from that exposure. But I want the traitors in my organization identified first. That's non-negotiable. Lena considered this, clearly torn between her oath as a police officer and the impossible situation she'd found herself in. How do I know you won't just eliminate the traitors and then eliminate me before I can expose anything? You don't. You're going to have to trust me. That's asking a lot from a cop you found dying in an alley. I know, but consider this. I've had hours to eliminate you while you were unconscious. I've had hours to search you, take your evidence, destroy anything that threatened me. Instead, I spent 15 hours ensuring you survived. Adrian met her eyes directly. I made a choice in that alley, Detective Cross. I'm living with the consequences. The question is whether you're willing to do the same. The monitors beeped their steady rhythm, measuring heartbeats, measuring the space between life and death, between trust and betrayal. Between two impossible allies bound by circumstances neither could have predicted. Lena's hand moved to her wound again, a gesture that seemed to ground her in the reality of what had happened, what was happening. My evidence is in a safety deposit box. Bank of America on 5th Street. Box 237. And the key? Sewn into the lining of my jacket, which is probably soaked with blood in your car. My people will have cleaned the car, but they know to preserve evidence. Adrian pulled out his phone. I'll have them retrieve your jacket. And then? And then we make a plan. We identify who you are investigating. We determine the scope of corruption. We figure out how it connects to my operations. He paused. And we stay alive long enough to see this through. You make it sound simple. Nothing about this is simple, Detective, but I've built a career on managing complicated situations. Adrian's expression hardened. What I need to know is whether you're capable of working with a criminal to bring down criminals. Because the moment you help me, you cross a line. You become complicit in everything I am. Lena's laugh came out bitter. I'm already complicit. The moment you saved my life instead of letting me die with my integrity intact, you made me complicit. My partner shot me and left me to bleed out because I threatened to expose corruption. I survived because the city's most notorious crime boss decided to play hero. She met his eyes. I crossed every line the moment I woke up in your facility. Then we understand each other. We understand necessity. That's not the same as trust. It's a start. The door opened, and Maria entered with Diego behind her. Both stopped short when they saw Lena conscious and talking with Adrian. She's awake, Maria said, stating the obvious while her eyes swept over the monitors. How do you feel, Ms. Cross? Lena supplied. Lena Cross. And I feel like I got shot twice and survived surgery in a criminal medical facility. Maria's lips twitched. At least you're honest. She approached the bed, professional despite the situation. I need to check your vitals, examine the surgical site, make sure there's no internal bleeding or complications. Lena glanced at Adrian, who nodded and stood. I'll give you privacy. Diego, come with me.
In the hallway, Diego fixed him with a look that demanded answers. She knows who you are. Yes. She knows where she is. Yes. And you told her anyway. Not quite accusation, but close. I told her because lying would have been pointless. She's a detective, Diego. She would have figured it out within hours. Adrian started walking toward his office. Besides, we're going to need her cooperation. For what? To identify who in our organization has been making deals with corrupt cops without my authorization. Diego grabbed his arm, stopping him. Boss, you can't be serious. She's a cop. The moment we let her go, she'll what? Run to her department where her own partner tried to execute her? Report to superiors who might be part of the corruption? Adrian pulled free. She's as trapped as we are, Diego. The difference is she has information we need and we have resources she needs. It's a partnership born of mutual necessity. It's insanity. It's strategy. Adrian continued toward his office, Diego following. I want everything we have on police corruption investigations. I want to know which officers have approached us, which cases have mysteriously disappeared, which evidence has gone missing. Compile it all. That's going to take time. Then start now. Adrian entered his office, the space he'd designed to project power and control, dark wood, expensive art, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. Also, I need you to retrieve something from the car cleanup, a jacket with evidence sewn into the lining. Evidence of what? Police corruption. Detective Cross was investigating officers on our payroll. Diego's eyes widened. We don't have officers on our payroll. You've always kept police contact minimal, carefully managed. Exactly. Which means someone's been operating behind my back, making deals I didn't authorize, creating liability I didn't approve. Adrian sat behind his desk, the weight of leadership settling over him like familiar armor. This goes deeper than we thought, Diego, and we're going to find out exactly how deep. Diego nodded slowly. And the detective? What happens when she recovers? Then she helps us identify the corruption, and we help her survive long enough to see justice done. You're playing a dangerous game, boss. I've been playing dangerous games for 15 years. Adrian's eyes hardened. This one just has higher stakes. After Diego left, Adrian sat alone in his office, watching the city stretch beyond his windows. Somewhere out there, corrupt cops believed they'd successfully eliminated a threat. Somewhere out there, traitors in his organization believed they'd continue operating in shadows. Somewhere out there, Derek Kane believed he'd murdered his partner and gotten away with it. They were all wrong. Adrian pulled out his phone and made a call to his information specialist. I need everything on Detective Lena Cross. Service record, cases, partners, commendations, complaints. Everything. That'll raise flags if we're not careful. Be careful, but be thorough. Time frame? 24 hours. He ended the call and turned back to the window, where afternoon light painted the city in shades of gold and shadow. In that city, systems of power and corruption intertwined like roots beneath soil, invisible but foundational. Police protected criminals, criminals paid police. Everyone maintained the balance because the balance maintained power. But Detective Lena Cross had threatened that balance, had dug too deep, asked too many questions, followed too many connections. And now she was dead, at least according to everyone who mattered. Adrian's reflection stared back at him from the window, and he barely recognized the man looking back. 15 years ago, he'd been a soldier, then a strategist, then a criminal who believed he could build something better than the chaos he'd found on these streets. He'd constructed an empire through intelligence, planning, and ruthless efficiency. But he'd never saved a cop before, never made a decision based purely on instinct rather than strategy, never looked into dying eyes and chosen compassion over self-preservation. What are you becoming? He asked his reflection. The city offered no answers. Back in the recovery room, Lena lay still as Maria completed her examination, every touch sending pain lancing through her abdomen despite the medication. You're healing well, Maria said, stepping back. No signs of infection or internal bleeding. The surgery was successful. How long until I can move? Move as in walk to the bathroom? A few days with support? Move as in leave this facility? Weeks. You sustained massive trauma, Detective. Your body needs time to heal. I don't have weeks. Then you'll die from complications, and Mr. Voss's dramatic rescue will have been for nothing. Maria's voice carried the authority of someone who'd seen too many patients ignore medical advice. I don't know what deal you're making with him, what information you're trading, what alliance you're forming, but none of it matters if you're dead. Lena stared at the ceiling. My partner tried to kill me. I gathered that from the gunshot wounds. 8 years. We worked together for 8 years. I trusted him with my life. Bitterness flooded her voice. Turns out the trust was misplaced. Maria pulled up a chair, her expression softening slightly. I've worked for Adrian for 3 years. In that time, I've seen him make countless decisions, strategic, tactical, ruthless when necessary. I've never seen him take a risk like this. What's your point? My point is that whatever reason he gives you for saving your life, there's something else. Something he probably doesn't fully understand himself. Maria met her eyes. Be careful, detective. Not because he's dangerous, though he is, but because you're both walking into territory neither of you has navigated before. An alliance between a cop and a crime boss. An alliance born from impossible circumstances. Maria stood. Get some rest. Your body needs time to heal, and you're going to need your strength for whatever comes next. After Maria left, Lena lay in the quiet room, listening to monitors beep and machines hum, thinking about impossible choices and unexpected allies. She was alive. Against all odds, against all logic, she was alive because Adrian Voss had chosen mercy over self-preservation. But at what cost? And what happened when their temporary alliance served its purpose? Would he let her go? Would she arrest him? Could either of them walk away from this without destroying the other? Lena's hand moved to her wound, feeling the bandages that represented a choice that would change everything. Outside, the city continued its eternal dance of light and shadow, law and lawlessness, justice and corruption. And somewhere in that dance, two impossible allies had just decided to burn the whole system down. 3 days crawled past like wounded animals. Lena remained in the recovery room, her body healing with agonizing slowness, while her mind raced through scenarios and strategies. Maria checked on her every 6 hours with clinical efficiency, monitoring vitals and changing bandages while offering minimal conversation. Diego appeared occasionally, silent and watchful, his distrust of her obvious in every cautious movement. But Adrian came every day. He arrived each morning at precisely 8 o'clock, carrying coffee he never drank and newspapers he barely read. He'd settle into the chair beside her bed, and they'd talk. Carefully, guardedly, like two chess players analyzing an impossibly complex board. On the third morning, Lena finally asked the question that had been burning in her mind since she woke up. Why do you really come here every day? She shifted in the bed, wincing as pain flared through her abdomen. You've got an empire to run, leaks to plug, enemies circling. Yet you waste hours sitting in a recovery room with a cop who should be your enemy. Adrian looked up from the financial section he'd been pretending to read. In the morning light filtering through reinforced windows, his face showed exhaustion he usually kept hidden, shadows under his eyes, tension in his jaw, the weight of leadership etched into every line. Maybe I'm ensuring my investment stays alive, he said. That's the answer you give Diego and Marcus. What's the real one? His lips curved slightly. You're perceptive. I'm a detective. It's literally my job. Lena studied him, noting details she'd cataloged over the past 3 days. Expensive clothes worn with casual indifference, hands that moved with controlled precision, eyes that analyzed everything, missed nothing. You don't strike me as the sentimental type, Mr. Voss. So either you see an angle I'm missing or something about this situation has you genuinely rattled. Can't it be both? It could be, but I don't think it is. Adrian set down the newspaper, giving her his full attention. You want honesty, Detective Cross? I don't know why I saved you. Every logical calculation told me to walk away. Every survival instinct screamed at me to leave you bleeding in that alley. But I looked at you, dying, defiant, refusing to surrender even with bullets in your gut. And I made a choice that defied 15 years of carefully constructed logic. That's not an answer. It's the only answer I have. Frustration bled through his controlled exterior. I've spent my entire adult life making calculated decisions. Risk versus reward. Cost versus benefit. I built an empire by eliminating emotion from strategy. And then I found you dying. And for the first time in 15 years, I made a decision based purely on instinct. Lena absorbed this,
trying to reconcile the confession with the dangerous criminal sitting beside her hospital bed. You regret it. I should regret it, but I don't, which disturbs me more than the decision itself. Welcome to my world, Lena said dryly. I've spent 3 days trying to figure out how to work with a crime boss without destroying everything I believe in. Turns out moral certainty gets complicated when the criminal saves your life. Is that what's bothering you? The moral complexity? Among other things, she gestured at the monitors, the IV, the sterile room. I'm supposed to arrest you. Instead, I'm making deals with you. I'm supposed to trust the system. Instead, my own partner put 2 bullets in me because I threatened to expose that system's corruption. Everything I thought I knew has been turned inside out. Adrian leaned back, considering. What if I told you the system was always this corrupt? That you just hadn't seen deep enough to recognize it? I'd say you're projecting criminal cynicism onto legitimate institutions. And I'd say you're clinging to idealism in the face of overwhelming evidence to the contrary. But his tone carried no judgment, only observation. How long have you been a detective? 15 years? Made detective at 28 after 6 years in uniform. And in those 15 years, how many cases have you seen buried? How many witnesses suddenly develop amnesia? How many suspects walk free despite overwhelming evidence? Lena's jaw tightened. Enough to recognize patterns. That's why I started investigating. What made you suspicious of your partner specifically? The question landed like a physical blow. Lena's hand moved to her wound, that unconscious gesture of grounding herself in painful reality. A case 6 months ago. Armed robbery at a jewelry store in the Diamond District. 3 suspects, clear security footage, forensic evidence. We had them cold. Let me guess. Evidence disappeared. Worse, evidence was altered. The security footage we'd logged into evidence showed different timestamps when it reappeared. Witness statements had been modified. The forensic report changed. Lena's voice hardened. Derek handled most of the chain of custody. I didn't think anything of it. He was my partner, my friend. But then the case fell apart. Suspects walked, and I started paying closer attention. How many other cases showed similar patterns? 17 over 3 years, all following the same template. Solid evidence mysteriously compromised, cases collapsing at critical moments, defendants walking free, and they all had one thing in common. They were connected to organized crime operations. To your operations specifically, or at least operations I believe were yours based on intelligence reports and surveillance. Lena fixed him with a sharp look. You're telling me you weren't behind it. I'm telling you that any protection my organization receives comes through legitimate channels. Lawyers who exploit legal technicalities, political contributions that ensure favorable policy, carefully managed relationships with officials who have their own reasons for looking the other way. Not street-level cops tampering with evidence. That's amateur hour. That's liability waiting to explode. Then someone was using your name, your reputation. That's what concerns me. Adrian stood, moving to the window with the restless energy of a predator trapped in too small a cage. My organization operates on precision and discretion. We don't leave trails. We don't create exposure. But if corrupt cops have been burying cases in my name, creating the appearance of protection I never authorized, that means someone's building a narrative. A narrative that leads to you. Exactly. Federal task forces have been circling for months, building cases that keep hitting dead ends because evidence mysteriously disappears. I assumed it was my security measures working as designed, but what if it's the opposite? What if someone's been deliberately creating a pattern that points directly at me while using that same pattern to operate their own criminal enterprise? Lena's detective mind engaged despite her physical weakness, analyzing the implications. A frame job. Someone running their own operations while making it look like you're behind the corruption protecting them. When the authorities finally put together enough evidence to move, they come after you instead of the actual architect. While the real corruption continues operating in the shadows, Adrian turned back to face her. It's elegant, really. Use my reputation as both shield and scapegoat. The corrupt cops get protection for their real operations while building a case against me. When I eventually fall, they eliminate a rival and deflect all investigation away from their actual network. Jesus. Lena felt the pieces clicking together, a puzzle far more complex than she'd imagined. That's why Derek tried to kill me.
I wasn't just investigating police corruption. I was about to expose the entire structure. Names, connections, money trails. Everything that would reveal not just the corrupt cops, but whoever's orchestrating the whole operation. And your evidence is in a safety deposit box at Bank of America. Box 237, 5th Street branch. Lena met his eyes. We need to get it. Soon. If Derek realizes I survived, if anyone suspects the evidence exists, they'll move to secure it, I know. Adrian pulled out his phone, checking the time. Your jacket arrived yesterday. Diego's people extracted the key from the lining, but accessing the box presents complications. Because I'm officially dead. The bank will have been notified. Your account's frozen. Any attempt to access your safety deposit box will trigger alerts. Adrian pocketed his phone. We need someone with your biometric data and legal authority to access the box. You mean you need me to walk into a bank 3 days after being shot and pretend everything's normal? I mean, we need a strategy that doesn't immediately alert everyone to your survival while still securing evidence before it's destroyed. Lena tried to sit up, gasping as pain lanced through her abdomen. Adrian moved instinctively to help, but she waved him off. I can barely walk to the bathroom without support. How am I supposed to get to a bank, access a safety deposit box, and escape without being recognized? You're not. At least not yet. Adrian returned to his chair. Maria says you need at least another week before you're mobile enough to attempt anything that strenuous, which gives us time to plan properly. A week is too long. Every day I'm here, every day that evidence sits in that box, is another opportunity for them to realize I'm alive and move to destroy everything. Would you rather attempt it now and die from the exertion? Or die because Derek spots you walking into the bank you've been declared dead? Adrian's voice carried brutal practicality. I understand urgency, detective, but rushing gets people killed. Trust me on that. Lena wanted to argue, but her body's weakness made the argument for her. She couldn't even sit up without help. Walking into a bank, accessing the box, escaping if things went wrong, all impossible in her current condition. I hate this, she said quietly. Being trapped, being helpless. Then use the time productively. Tell me everything you found, every name, every connection, every piece of the puzzle you put together before Derek tried to silence you. Why? So you can eliminate your competition before I recover enough to use the evidence against you? Adrian's expression hardened. If I wanted to eliminate competition, I'd have done it without involving you. I'm asking because understanding the scope of corruption helps us both survive what's coming, unless you prefer to keep your secrets and hope I remain altruistic. They stared at each other across the familiar gulf, trust and suspicion in constant tension. Finally, Lena spoke. The corruption starts at the precinct level but extends much higher. Patrol officers, detectives, even some brass. I identified at least 20 cops across 4 precincts who showed patterns consistent with being on someone's payroll, cases mysteriously collapsing, evidence disappearing, suspects walking despite solid arrests. 20 cops is more than simple opportunism. That's organized. It gets worse. The operations they were protecting weren't random. They all connected to specific criminal enterprises: drug distribution, human trafficking, weapons smuggling, money laundering. Different crews, different territories, but all protected by the same network of corrupt officers. And you believe these operations were attributed to my organization? Every intelligence report, every surveillance log, every briefing named you as the primary target, your network, your distribution channels, your money. Lena's eyes narrowed. But the more I investigated, the less it made sense. You're known for precision and discretion. These operations were sloppy, high-profile, deliberately provocative, like someone wanted attention. Someone building a narrative, Adrian said slowly, making noise in my name while I maintained actual silence. Exactly. And when I started following the money, tracing payments and connections, I found something interesting. The corrupt cops weren't being paid through your financial networks. The money came from somewhere else entirely. Adrian leaned forward. Where? That's what I was still investigating when Derek shot me. I'd traced payments to a shell company called Meridian Solutions. Corporate filings showed it as a consulting firm, but the money flow suggested something else entirely. Millions moving through accounts in Caribbean banks, then distributed to the corrupt officers through a maze of intermediaries. Meridian Solutions. Adrian pulled out his phone, typing rapidly. I'll have my people research it, see what connections we can find. Your people being criminals who hack financial databases. My people being specialists in information acquisition. Adrian didn't look up from his phone. We can debate methodology later. Right now, I want to know who's been operating in my shadow. Lena watched him work, noting the intense focus, the controlled aggression in every movement. Whatever else Adrian Voss might be, he was a man who took betrayal personally. There's something else, she said. The operations being protected weren't just criminal enterprises. Some of them had political connections, campaign contributions, fundraising events, networking with city officials. You think the corruption extends beyond police? I think we're looking at a network that spans multiple power structures. Police protection for criminal operations that fund political campaigns, that influence policy that enables more criminal activity. It's circular, self-reinforcing. Adrian set down his phone, his expression grim. That kind of systematic corruption doesn't emerge organically. Someone built it, someone's running it. That's what I was trying to figure out when Derek tried to kill me. I had names, connections, money trails, but I didn't have the architect. The person or people at the center holding all the pieces together. And your evidence, everything you'd compiled, it's all in box 237. Files, documents, financial records, surveillance photos, everything I gathered over 6 months of secret investigation. Lena's hand moved to her wound again. If we lose that evidence, we lose everything. The corrupt cops stay protected, the criminal operations continue, and whoever's orchestrating this remains in the shadows. The door opened, interrupting them. Maria entered with her usual brisk efficiency, medical bag in hand. Morning examination time, Detective. Mr. Voss, you'll need to step out. Adrian stood, but Lena spoke before he could leave. We need a plan, for the bank, for the evidence. I'm working on it, Adrian said. Rest, heal, let me handle the logistics. After he left, Maria began her examination with practiced precision. You're healing well, she said, checking the surgical site. No infection, no complications. You might actually survive this. That's reassuring. Don't get cocky. You're still weeks away from full recovery. Maria rewrapped the bandages. How's the pain? Manageable. The medication helps. I can increase the dosage if you need it. I need to stay sharp. Pain I can handle. Maria studied her with knowing eyes. You're planning something. Whatever Adrian's cooking up, you're going to try pushing yourself before you're ready. I don't have the luxury of waiting until I'm ready. Then you're a fool. But I suppose that's what makes you good at your job. Maria packed away her medical supplies. Fair warning, Detective. If you tear those stitches trying to be a hero, I'm not going to be gentle fixing you up again. After Maria left, Lena lay still, staring at the ceiling and thinking about impossible timelines and desperate plans. Her body needed weeks to heal properly. But the evidence wouldn't wait weeks. Derek wouldn't assume she was dead forever. At some point, someone would check that safety deposit box, and when they did... Her thoughts were interrupted by the door opening again. This time Diego entered, his expression even more guarded than usual. We need to talk, he said without preamble. About? About the fact that you're a cop in our facility, that you're making plans with my boss that could get us all killed, and that I have no idea if we can trust you. Diego pulled up the chair Adrian had vacated. So I'm going to ask you directly, Detective Cross. What happens when this is over? When you get your evidence, when the corruption is exposed, when you're healthy enough to walk away? Lena met his gaze steadily. You want to know if I'll turn on Adrian, if I'll use what I learn here against him. That's exactly what I want to know. Honest answer, I don't know. She saw his expression harden. But that honesty is worth more than a comfortable lie. I'm a cop, Diego. My job is bringing criminals to justice. Adrian is a criminal. By every definition, every oath I took, he should be in prison. Then why should we trust you? Because right now we have aligned interests. I need Adrian's resources to survive and secure evidence. He needs my information to identify who's operating behind his back. Neither of us can succeed without the other. Lena shifted, wincing. After that? I don't know. Maybe we become permanent enemies. Maybe we find a way to coexist. But lying to you about my intentions helps no one. Diego absorbed this, his dark eyes calculating. Adrian saved your life. That doesn't earn any loyalty. It earns gratitude. Respect for a difficult choice he made, but it doesn't erase 15 years of investigating men who destroy lives for profit. I won't pretend otherwise. Fair enough, Diego stood. For what it's worth, I think you're making a mistake trusting Adrian. Not because he'll betray you. He won't. Not if he gives his word. But because you're opening yourself to complications you can't control. His world isn't like yours. There are no clear rules, no backup, no system to catch you if you fall. Your world put 2 bullets in me and left me to die, Lena said quietly. My partner, someone I trusted completely, executed me because I threatened corrupt cops. So forgive me if I'm not convinced my world is superior to yours. Diego studied her for a long moment, then nodded. Point taken. Just remember, in Adrian's world, trust is currency and betrayal is death. You're playing in that arena now, whether you accept it or not. He left and Lena was alone again with her thoughts and the steady beep of monitors. Hours passed. Afternoon light shifted to evening shadows. Maria brought dinner, bland, nutritious, designed for a recovering surgical patient. Lena forced herself to eat despite no appetite, knowing her body needed fuel to heal. Adrian didn't return that evening. For the first time since she'd woken up, he was absent. Part of Lena felt relief. The constant tension of their conversations exhausted her more than she wanted to admit, but another part felt unexpectedly disappointed. She was getting used to their morning talks. The careful dance of information and strategy. The way he analyzed problems with the same methodical precision she used in investigations. It disturbed her how easily she'd fallen into working partnership with a man she should be arresting. The door opened near midnight. Lena had been dozing, pain medication making her drowsy. She opened her eyes to find Adrian standing in the doorway, looking worse than she'd ever seen him. His suit was rumpled, tie loosened, exhaustion written across his face. Something's happened, she said immediately. Adrian moved to the chair, dropping into it heavily. Marcus Chen is dead. The words hit like bullets. Your associate, the one you mentioned. My oldest friend. 20 years we worked together. He helped me build everything. Adrian's voice remained controlled, but Lena could hear the rage beneath it. Someone put 3 bullets in his head and left him in his car outside his home. His wife found him 2 hours ago. Jesus, I'm sorry. Don't be sorry. Help me understand why someone would eliminate my most trusted lieutenant 3 days after you started telling me about systematic corruption. Adrian's eyes met hers, burning with cold fury. This isn't coincidence, Detective. Marcus was killed to send a message. Lena's mind raced through implications. To you, to show they know you're investigating, that they can reach your inner circle. Or to eliminate someone who might have information about who's been operating behind my back. Adrian pulled out his phone, showing her a photo. This was left at the scene. Lena looked at the image. Marcus Chen's body slumped in the driver's seat, 3 precise shots to the head. Professional, execution style. But it was the object placed on the dashboard that made her blood run cold. A police badge. Not Marcus's badge. He wouldn't have one. Someone else's badge, deliberately positioned where it couldn't be missed. They're taunting us, Lena said, showing that police are involved, that they have reach and resources. Or they're framing the police, making it look like cops killed Marcus to cover their tracks. Adrian pocketed his phone. Either way, this changes everything. Marcus's death means whoever we're dealing with knows I'm investigating, knows you survived, knows we're working together. How could they know that? I've been locked in this facility. You've been careful. Apparently not careful enough. Adrian stood, pacing like a caged animal. Someone's watching. Someone's tracking our movements, our communications, our plans. Lena felt ice in her veins. A leak in your organization? Has to be. No other explanation. Adrian's expression turned lethal. Which means we have less time than I thought. If there's a traitor close enough to know about you, close enough to kill Marcus, then accessing your safety deposit box just became exponentially more dangerous. We can't wait another week. You can barely walk. Then you'll have to help me. Lena forced herself to sit up despite the pain screaming through her abdomen. Marcus's death proves we're running out of time. Whoever's behind this is moving to eliminate threats. First me, now Marcus. How long before they figure out where I'm recovering? How long before they come for both of us? Adrian stopped pacing, considering. You're in no condition. I'm in no condition to be dead either, but that didn't stop Derek from trying. Lena met his eyes. We get the evidence tomorrow, before they have time to move against us again, before more people die. Tomorrow you'll still be recovering from major surgery. Then I'll recover while we work. But we're not waiting. Lena's voice carried absolute determination. You saved my life for a reason, Adrian. Let's make sure that reason wasn't wasted. He studied her for a long moment, seeing past the weakness and pain to the steel beneath. Finally, he nodded. Tomorrow morning, 6 a.m. I'll have Diego arrange transportation and security. What about the bank? They won't let a dead woman access her safety deposit box. Leave that to me. I have resources. Adrian moved toward the door, then paused. Marcus had a wife and 2 daughters. They have no idea why he was killed or who killed him. When this is over, when we expose whoever's behind this, I want them to know. I want them to understand Marcus didn't die for nothing. I promise, Lena said quietly. We'll get justice. For Marcus. For me. For everyone they've hurt. Adrian nodded and left, leaving Lena alone with the weight of promises made and the reality of tomorrow's risks. She didn't sleep that night. Instead, she forced herself to stand, to take painful steps around the room, to test her body's limits. Every movement sent agony through her abdomen. Every breath reminded her of bullets and betrayal and the thin line between life and death. But she'd survived worse. She'd survived Derek's execution attempt. She'd survived surgery and shock and 3 days trapped in a criminal's medical facility. She'd survive tomorrow. At 5 a.m., Maria appeared with a wheelchair and a look of professional disapproval. You're insane. You know that, right? I've been told. Lena allowed herself to be helped into the wheelchair, biting back gasps of pain. If you tear those stitches, if you develop complications, if you collapse, then you'll fix me. That's what Adrian pays you for. Maria shook her head but helped adjust Lena's clothing, dark pants and a loose shirt that hid the bandages. He's paying me to keep you alive, not to enable suicide missions. Then consider this job security. At 6 a.m. precisely, Adrian arrived with Diego and 2 others Lena didn't recognize. All dressed professionally, all moving with controlled purpose. They looked like businessmen, not criminals preparing for a high-risk operation. Ready? Adrian asked. Lena gripped the wheelchair's arms. Let's get my evidence before someone else dies. They moved through the facility's corridors to the underground garage where 3 identical black SUVs waited. Adrian helped Lena from the wheelchair into the middle vehicle's back seat, his touch surprisingly gentle despite the urgency. Diego will drive, Adrian said, settling beside her. The other vehicles are decoys. If we're being watched, they'll have trouble knowing which one you're actually in. You think we're being followed? I think Marcus's murder proves someone's tracking us, so we assume surveillance and plan accordingly. The garage door opened and all 3 SUVs pulled out simultaneously, heading in different directions. Lena watched through tinted windows as the city awakened. Early morning traffic, pedestrians rushing to work, the ordinary rhythm of urban life completely unaware of the deadly chess game being played in shadows. The bank opens at 9, Adrian said. We'll arrive at 8:45. You'll have 15 minutes to access the box and extract the evidence before security protocols become problematic. What about my biometric data? The bank will have me listed as deceased. Adrian pulled out a phone, showing her a screen. As of this morning, Detective Lana Cross was removed from the deceased database due to administrative error, a tragic mix-up involving 2 officers with similar names. You're officially alive again, at least according to the bank's security systems. Lena stared at him. How did you? I have resources. People who specialize in making digital realities bend to necessity. Adrian pocketed the phone. You'll walk in, access your box, walk out. Simple and clean. Nothing's ever simple and clean, which is why Diego and the others will be positioned throughout the bank. First sign of trouble, we extract you immediately. The drive took 20 minutes through morning traffic. Lena spent the time running through scenarios, analyzing risks, preparing for everything that could go wrong. Her abdomen ached with every bump in the road, every turn, every stop. The pain medication Maria had given her helped, but Lena had refused anything strong enough to dull her awareness. She needed to be sharp. Bank of America's Fifth Street branch appeared ahead, a modern building of glass and steel, already showing signs of early morning activity. Diego circled the block once, checking for surveillance, then pulled into the parking structure. 2 minutes, Diego said, glancing back at them. I've got eyes on the entrance. No obvious watchers, but that doesn't mean they're not there. Adrian helped Lena from the SUV. She'd refused the wheelchair. Walking into a bank in a wheelchair 3 days after being shot would raise questions. Instead, she leaned heavily on Adrian's arm, letting him support most of her weight while maintaining the appearance of casual assistance. Slow and steady, Adrian murmured as they crossed the parking structure toward the bank entrance. You're a customer with a slight injury, nothing suspicious. Every step sent pain through Lena's core, but she forced herself to maintain composure. They entered the bank at 8:47, early enough to avoid crowds, late enough that staff would be settled into morning routines. The interior was all marble and efficiency, tellers preparing stations while a few early customers waited for service. Adrian guided Lena toward the safety deposit box area, where a young clerk looked up with professional courtesy. Good morning, the clerk said. How can I help you? Lena showed her badge, the one Adrian had retrieved from the alley. Detective Lena Cross. I need to access my safety deposit box. The clerk's fingers flew over her keyboard, then paused. Detective Cross, box 237, I'll need to see identification and perform biometric verification. Lena produced her driver's license with hands that tremated slightly, not from fear, but from the exertion of standing upright while her body screamed for rest. The clerk scanned the ID, then had Lena place her finger on a biometric reader. Everything checks out, the clerk said, standing. Follow me, please. They were led through a secure door into the vault area, rows of safety deposit boxes lining walls of reinforced steel. The clerk located box 237, inserted her key, then stepped back for Lena to insert hers. The key Adrian's people had extracted from her jacket lining slid home smoothly. Lena turned both keys, and the box slid free from its housing. Take all the time you need, the clerk said, directing them to a private viewing room. Just let me know when you're finished. Inside the viewing room, Lena opened the box with trembling hands. Inside lay everything she'd gathered over 6 months: file folders, USB drives, photographs, financial documents. Her entire investigation compressed into one metal container. This is it, she breathed. Everything we need to... The lights went out. Emergency lighting kicked in immediately, bathing everything in dim red illumination. Adrian's hand moved to his concealed weapon, eyes scanning for threats. Power failure, came an announcement over the intercom. Please remain calm. Normal power will be restored momentarily. That's not a coincidence, Adrian said quietly. They're here. Lena grabbed the box's contents, stuffing everything into the bag Adrian had brought. We need to move, now. They emerged from the viewing room to find the vault area empty. The clerk had disappeared during the power failure. Adrian's phone buzzed with a text from Diego. 3 armed men entering bank, police uniforms. Get out now. Cops, Adrian said, reading the message. 3 of them, coming for you. Derek, Lena realized. He knows I'm alive. He's come to finish it. Adrian pulled his weapon, the Sig Sauer he'd carried for 12 years but never fired in anger. Can you run? I can try. They moved through the vault area toward a rear exit, Lena clutching the bag of evidence while pain screamed through her abdomen with every step. Behind them, voices echoed through the bank, authoritative, commanding, searching. The rear exit led to a service corridor. Adrian and Lena had made it halfway down when a door at the far end burst open and Derek Kane appeared, weapon drawn, 2 other officers flanking him. Lena! Derek's voice carried false concern that made Lena's blood boil. Thank God you're alive! We've been searching everywhere for you. Adrian shifted position, placing himself partially between Lena and the armed cops. Detective Kane, I presume. Derek's eyes narrowed, recognition dawning. Adrian Voss. So the rumors were true. Lena, he's kidnapped you. We're here to rescue you. Rescue me? Lena's laugh came out bitter. You shot me, Derek. You left me bleeding to death in an alley. That's the trauma talking. The kidnapping has confused you. Derek took a step forward, his weapon tracking toward Adrian. Sir, release Detective Cross. Step away from her with your hands visible. She's not going anywhere with you, Adrian said calmly. We both know she'd be dead within the hour. That's a threat against a police officer. That's a statement of fact about corrupt cops trying to silence a witness. One of the other officers, young, nervous, shifted uncomfortably. Detective Kane, maybe we should call this in. Get back up. If she's really been kidnapped— She hasn't been kidnapped, Martinez, Derek snapped. She's confused, traumatized, and this criminal is manipulating her. Lena clutched the evidence bag tighter. There's a safety deposit box in that vault. Box 237. It contains everything I gathered about police corruption. Names, financial records, connections to organized crime. You're in there, Derek. All the cases you buried, all the evidence you destroyed. Everything. Derek's expression hardened, the false concern evaporating. Give me the bag, Lena. Or what? You'll shoot me again? In front of witnesses this time? There are no witnesses. The power failure cleared the bank. And when I report that Adrian Voss kidnapped a police detective, tried to steal evidence from a bank vault, and was shot while resisting arrest— Derek's smile turned cold. Well, who's going to question that story? The third officer, older, harder, raised his weapon toward Adrian. On your knees, now. Adrian didn't move. You really think you can kill both of us here and walk away clean? I think we're police officers responding to a bank robbery and kidnapping, Derek said. I think we'll be heroes. Lena's hand moved toward the weapon Adrian had given her, a small backup pistol he'd holstered at her waist before they left the facility. Her fingers closed around it even as her body screamed in protest. Lena, don't, Adrian said quietly, sensing her intention. But she was already moving, pulling the weapon, aiming at her former partner with hands that shook from pain and rage and betrayal. Drop it, Martinez shouted, swinging his weapon toward her. Everything happened in heartbeats. Derek fired first, his shot aimed at Adrian but going wide as Lena's sudden movement threw off his aim. Adrian returned fire, his shot hitting the older officer in the shoulder and sending him spinning. Martinez hesitated, weapon trained on Lena, but finger frozen on the trigger, unable to shoot a fellow cop even while watching his world implode. Lena fired twice, both shots hitting Derek's center mass. Her former partner stumbled backward, shock and disbelief on his face as blood bloomed across his chest. You— Derek coughed blood. You shot me! You shot me first, Lena said coldly. Consider us even. Derek collapsed, his weapon clattering across the floor. The older officer groaned, clutching his wounded shoulder. Martinez stood frozen, weapon still raised, but comprehension dawning in his eyes. This isn't what it looks like, Martinez said desperately. Kane said you were kidnapped, said Voss was dangerous. I didn't know. You know now, Adrian said, weapon still trained on the young officer. Question is what you do with that knowledge. Martinez looked at Derek bleeding on the floor, at his wounded partner, at Lena holding evidence that could destroy careers and lives. Slowly, he lowered his weapon. I became a cop to help people, Martinez said quietly. Not to murder witnesses, not to protect corruption. He holstered his weapon. I'm calling this in. Real backup. Real investigation. They'll bury it, Lena said. The corruption goes deeper than you know. Then give me the evidence. Let me take it to people we can trust. There is no one we can trust in the department, Lena said. That's the problem. Sirens wailed in the distance, real cops responding to shots fired. Adrian grabbed Lena's arm. We need to leave. Now. Martinez blocked their path. I can't let you— You can and you will, Adrian interrupted. Because if we stay here, if we get caught up in police custody, that evidence disappears, and everyone who tried to do the right thing dies. Including you, Officer Martinez, including anyone who helped us. Martinez wavered, training and instinct warring with the reality unfolding before him. Please, Lena said. I know what I'm asking. I know it goes against everything you were taught. But if you want real justice, if you want the corruption exposed, you have to let us go. The sirens grew louder, closer. Martinez made his decision, stepping aside. Go. But Detective Cross, when this is over, when the evidence goes public, I want to testify. I want to help make it right. You will, Lena promised. I'll make sure of it. Adrian and Lena ran, or rather, Adrian ran while supporting Lena's stumbling, pain-racked progress. They burst through the rear exit into an alley where Diego waited with the SUV, engine running. Move, Diego shouted, as Adrian helped Lena into the vehicle. They peeled out as police cars screeched to a stop at the bank's front entrance, officers pouring out with weapons drawn. Lena clutched the evidence bag while pain exploded through her abdomen, Maria's warnings about torn stitches echoing in her mind. But she had the evidence. She'd survived Derek's second attempt to kill her, and somewhere in the maze of corruption they'd just barely escaped. The foundation was starting to crack. "Box 237, she gasped as Diego drove like he was fleeing hell itself. "We got it, we got everything." Adrian pressed his hand against her abdomen, where fresh blood was seeping through her shirt. "And you're bleeding again. Maria's going to kill both of us." "Get in line," Lena said, then passed out from the pain and exertion and impossible reality of having just shot her former partner in a bank vault, while police sirens screamed and the entire corrupt system came crashing down around them. The city blurred past as Diego drove toward the facility, toward safety, toward whatever came next in a story that had just become exponentially more dangerous and infinitely more urgent. Behind them, Derek Kane lay bleeding on a bank vault floor, finally experiencing the same terror he'd inflicted on Lena in that alley. Justice, it turned out, had a way of coming full circle. Lena woke to Maria's furious voice cutting through the fog of pain and medication. "You absolute idiots, both of you. I specifically said weeks of recovery. And what do? You drag her to a bank, get into a gunfight, and bring her back bleeding through surgical stitches that were holding together by a miracle." Maria's hands worked with brutal efficiency, cleaning the reopened wound while Lena gasped on the surgical table. If infection sets in now, if her organs fail because you pushed her body past its limits, is she going to survive? Adrian's voice, tight with concern that surprised Lena, even through her delirium. "If I have anything to say about it, yes. But this was monumentally stupid, Adrian. Monumentally." The sting of antiseptic made Lena cry out. "Detective, I need you conscious for this. No more passing out. Stay with me." Lena forced her eyes open, the recovery room swimming into focus. Adrian stood beside the table, his expensive suit stained with her blood. Diego hovered near the door, holding the evidence bag like it contained nuclear secrets. Beyond them, monitors beeped their urgent rhythm while Maria worked to repair damage that should never have happened. "Did we get it?" Lena managed. "The evidence?" "We got it," Adrian confirmed. "All of it. But you nearly died getting it." "Seemed important at the time." "It was important," Diego interjected. "Derek Kane is dead, shot by his partner in a bank vault." The story's already hitting news networks. 3 officers involved in an apparent robbery attempt that went wrong. Martinez is singing like a canary to anyone who'll listen about corruption and cover-ups. Lena's eyes widened despite the pain. "Derek's dead?" "You shot him twice, Detective," Maria said without looking up from her work. "Center mass. He bled out before paramedics arrived. Congratulations, you killed your partner." The words landed like physical blows. Lena had fired in self-defense, had watched Derek fall, but the finality of death hadn't registered through the chaos and adrenaline. Now it crashed over her. She'd killed Derek, her partner of 8 years, the man who'd saved her life twice in the line of duty before trying to end it in an alley. "I didn't have a choice," she said, though the words felt hollow. "I know," Adrian said quietly, "but that doesn't make it easier." Maria finished cleaning the wound and began restitching with practiced precision. "This is going to hurt worse than the original surgery. The tissue is already traumatized, and I'm working without anesthetic because I need you alert." She wasn't lying. Each stitch felt like fire, but Lena gritted her teeth and endured. She'd survived 2 bullets. She'd survived Derek's betrayal. She'd survived this too. 20 minutes later, Maria stepped back, exhausted and furious. "Done. Again. Now you're going to stay in that bed for at least 72 hours without moving, or so help me, I will sedate you into unconsciousness myself." "Can't promise that," Lena said through gritted teeth. "Then I'll make Adrian promise it for you." Maria turned to him. "She moves. She dies. That's simple. Her body can't take any more abuse." Adrian nodded. "She stays put. I'll make sure of it." After Maria left, muttering about stubborn patience and criminal stupidity, Diego approached with the evidence bag. "We need to go through this. Figure out what we're dealing with before the corruption finds us." Adrian pulled up chairs while Diego carefully emptied the bag's contents onto a sterile table. File folders, USB drives, photographs, bank statements, handwritten notes. 6 months of Lena's secret investigation spread before them like pieces of a deadly puzzle. "Walk us through it," Adrian said to Lena. "Everything you found, every connection." Lena shifted on the surgical table, ignoring Maria's warnings echoing in her mind. "Start with the financial records. The payments to corrupt officers all originated from Meridian Solutions. But when I traced Meridian's ownership through shell companies and offshore accounts, I found something interesting. The money didn't start with Meridian. It came through Meridian from somewhere else." Diego picked up a folder marked Financial Trail and began reading. Jesus. Millions moving through Caribbean banks, laundered through legitimate businesses, then distributed to officers through Meridian. This is sophisticated money laundering. "Which is why I knew it wasn't street-level corruption," Lena continued. "This required financial expertise, international banking connections, and political cover. Someone with serious resources built this network." Adrian studied a photograph from the evidence, a surveillance shot of 2 men meeting in what looked like an upscale restaurant. "Who are they?" "The one on the left is Captain Richard Dawson, my precinct commander. The one on the right is Michael Torres, CEO of Apex Development Corporation." Lena's voice hardened. "Torres's company has been buying up property throughout the city for the past 3 years. Warehouses, commercial buildings, residential blocks. Always in areas where criminal activity keeps property values depressed." "Let me guess," Adrian said slowly. "Areas where my supposed operations were most active." "Exactly. Torres would identify properties in high-crime neighborhoods, wait for values to bottom out, then buy them for pennies on the dollar. Once he owned the properties, the criminal activity would mysteriously decrease, values would rise, and he'd sell for massive profits." Diego's eyes widened. "That's not just corruption. That's orchestrated urban blight for profit." "It gets worse." Lena pointed to another document. "Torres wasn't just buying properties. He was also receiving city contracts for redevelopment projects. Contracts worth hundreds of millions, all approved by city council members who'd received campaign contributions from Meridian Solutions," Adrian finished. "The same shell company paying off corrupt cops." Torres built an entire ecosystem. Criminal operations create blight, depressing property values. He buys cheap. Then corrupt cops shut down those same criminal operations once he owns the properties. Values rise. He sells high and gets city contracts for redevelopment. Meanwhile, the criminal organizations he used to create the blight think they're being protected by cops on Adrian Voss's payroll, framing me as the criminal mastermind while Torres profits from the chaos. Adrian's voice carried cold fury. "Elegant, ruthless, and if federal authorities ever built a case, it would lead straight to me instead of Torres. That's why Derek tried to kill me. I'd connected Torres to Meridian, Meridian to the corrupt cops, and the corrupt cops to operations falsely attributed to you. If I'd taken that evidence to Internal Affairs or the DA, it would have exposed the entire structure." Diego whistled low. "How many cops are we talking about?" "At least 20 that I identified with certainty. Probably more I didn't catch." Lena gestured to another folder. "Their names are all documented. Rank, precinct, specific cases they buried, or evidence they destroyed. Some were taking direct payments, others were just following orders from corrupt superiors like Dawson." Adrian picked up a USB drive. "What's on these?" "Audio recordings, video surveillance, financial transactions. Everything I could gather without tipping off the corruption that I was investigating." Lena's expression darkened. "Including a recording of Derek admitting to destroying evidence in exchange for payments from Meridian. That's what finally convinced me he was dirty. That's why I confronted him." "And he drove you to an alley and shot you." "He didn't have a choice. If I exposed him, I exposed Dawson, which exposed Torres, which brought down the entire network." Lena met Adrian's eyes. "You saved my life, but you also saved the one piece of evidence that could destroy them all. That's why Marcus Chen died. That's why Derek came to the bank. They know I survived, and they know I have proof." "Then we need to move fast," Diego said. "Every hour we wait is another opportunity for them to destroy evidence, eliminate witnesses, and disappear." Adrian stood, pacing with that restless energy Lena had come to recognize as his thinking mode. "We can't just hand this to authorities. If the corruption extends to precinct captains and city council members, going through official channels means the evidence disappears and we all end up dead. Then what do you suggest? Lena asked. Because sitting on this evidence while more people die isn't an option. We need leverage. We need to force their hand in a way they can't bury or ignore. Adrian stopped pacing, his expression calculating. We need to make this public, loud, impossible to cover up. You want to go to the media? I want to go nuclear. Release everything simultaneously to multiple media outlets, federal authorities, and the public. Create such a firestorm of attention that attempting to bury it would only make it worse. Diego shook his head. That's suicide, boss. The moment we go public, every corrupt cop, every dirty official, everyone with something to lose comes after us. We'd be painting targets on our backs. We already have targets on our backs, Adrian countered. Marcus is dead. Derek tried to kill Lena twice. They know we're investigating. The only question is whether we die quietly or bring them down with us. He's right, Lena said, ignoring the pain as she shifted to face them both. We can't hide, can't run. The corruption knows we have the evidence. They'll keep coming until we're dead or the truth is exposed. At least if we go public, we have a chance. A chance of what? Diego demanded. Survival? Justice? Both seem unlikely when you're declaring war on the entire power structure. Then we don't fight fair, Adrian said quietly. We use every advantage we have. My resources, Lena's evidence, and the element of surprise. We hit them before they can coordinate a response. Lena's detective mind engaged despite exhaustion and pain. We'd need simultaneous releases. If one outlet gets the story first, the corruption has time to react, to create counter-narratives, to intimidate witnesses. But if every major media outlet, every federal agency, and the public all receive the evidence at the same time, they can't control the narrative, Adrian finished. Can't threaten every journalist, can't bury every investigation. The sheer volume of attention makes covering it up impossible. I have contacts at 3 major newspapers, Diego said slowly, warming to the idea despite his reservations. Journalists who've been trying to investigate organized crime for years. They'd kill for a story like this. I know federal prosecutors who aren't corrupt, Lena added. Career attorneys in the organized crime division who've been frustrated by cases mysteriously falling apart. Give them concrete evidence and they'll run with it. Adrian pulled out his phone. I can arrange for the evidence to be uploaded to secure servers, distributed through anonymous networks, released simultaneously across multiple platforms. By the time the corruption realizes what's happening, it'll be too late to stop. When? Lena asked. Tomorrow night. That gives us 24 hours to prepare, to secure the evidence, to set up distribution networks. After that, we release everything and deal with the consequences. Diego ran a hand through his hair. This is insane. You know that, right? We're talking about exposing corruption that reaches into police departments, city government, and criminal organizations. The blowback will be catastrophic. For them, Adrian said, we're already targets. At least this way we control when and how the information comes out. And after? Lena asked quietly. After the evidence goes public, after the investigations start, after the arrests begin? What happens to us? Adrian met her eyes, and in that moment Lena saw acceptance of consequences he'd already calculated. I'll probably be arrested. My organization will be investigated, dismantled. Everything I built over 15 years will be destroyed. You knew that when you decided to help me. I knew the risks. I'm choosing to accept them. Why? The question burst out of Lena before she could stop it. Why throw away everything for this? For me? Adrian was quiet for a long moment. Because 15 years ago, I chose a path that led into darkness. I told myself it was pragmatic, necessary, the only way to survive in a corrupt world. I built an empire by accepting that corruption as unchangeable reality. He gestured to the evidence spread before them. But you refused to accept it. You investigated, you documented, you risked your life to expose the truth even when your own partner betrayed you. You reminded me that accepting corruption isn't strength, it's surrender. Pretty words from a crime boss. Honest words from a man who's tired of living in shadows. Adrian's expression hardened. Besides, Torres and his network have been using my reputation as cover while undermining my actual operations. That's unforgivable. If I'm going down, I'm taking them with me. Diego cleared his throat. Touching moment aside, we have work to do. 24 hours isn't much time to prepare a coordinated information release across multiple platforms. Then we'd better start now, Adrian said. Diego, contact your journalist friends. Feel them out without revealing specifics. I want to know who we can trust before we hand over evidence. On it. Diego headed for the door, then paused. Boss, if this goes wrong, it won't. We'll make sure of it. After Diego left, Adrian turned back to Lena. You should rest. Let your body heal while we handle the logistics. Not a chance. This is my investigation, my evidence. I'm seeing it through. You can barely move without tearing stitches. Then I'll work from this table. Lena's voice carried absolute determination. I didn't survive 2 assassination attempts just to sit on the sidelines while you orchestrate the exposure. Adrian studied her, then nodded. Fair enough, but if Maria finds out I let you work instead of rest, she'll kill us both. Get in line behind Torres and the corrupt cops. They spent the next hours organizing evidence, creating comprehensive documentation packages for different audiences. Journalists received narratives with supporting documents. Federal prosecutors received legal briefs with admissible evidence. The public received simplified summaries with explosive revelations designed for maximum impact. Lena worked through exhaustion and pain, her detective mind cataloging every piece of evidence, every connection, every name that needed to be exposed. Adrian coordinated his network of specialists, IT experts who set up secure servers, lawyers who reviewed materials for legal exposure, security personnel who prepared for inevitable retaliation. As evening fell, Diego returned with news. I've got 4 journalists confirmed, 2 from the Times, 1 from the Post, 1 from an investigative podcast that has millions of listeners, all hungry for the story, all willing to publish simultaneously tomorrow night. Federal contacts? Adrian asked. 3 prosecutors in the Organized Crime Division, 1 FBI agent in public corruption, and someone from the Inspector General's office, Lena said, finishing another documentation package. All clean, all frustrated by cases mysteriously falling apart. They'll act on this evidence. What about Torres? Diego asked. He's going to realize what's happening when his world starts burning down. Man like that, he'll have escape plans, contingencies. Let him run, Lena said coldly. Once the evidence goes public, every airport, every border crossing, every private airfield will be watching for him. He won't make it out of the country. Assuming the corruption doesn't help him escape, the corruption will be too busy trying to save themselves. When 20 dirty cops and half a dozen city officials are simultaneously exposed, nobody's going to risk their own freedom helping Torres flee. Adrian's phone buzzed with a text. He read it, his expression darkening. We have a problem. One of my people just spotted surveillance on the facility. 3 vehicles, professional setup, rotating positions to avoid detection. Lena's blood ran cold. They found us. Apparently, which means our 24-hour timeline just collapsed. Adrian pulled up security camera feeds on his phone, showing Lena the vehicles positioned at strategic points around the building. We need to move up the release tonight. We're not ready, Diego protested. The distribution networks aren't fully set up. The journalists haven't had time to verify sources. Then they'll verify while the story breaks. We don't have time for perfect preparation. Adrian started typing rapidly on his phone. I'm initiating immediate release protocols. Everything goes out in 2 hours. 2 hours? Lena struggled to sit up despite Maria's warnings. That's not enough time to... It's the time we have. The surveillance outside means Torres knows we're here, knows we have the evidence, and is preparing to move against us. We release now or we die before we get the chance. Diego moved to the security monitors, studying the feed. I count at least 8 hostiles in those vehicles. Probably more we're not seeing. They're staging for an assault. How long before they move? Hard to say. Could be hours, could be minutes. Diego's hand moved to his weapon. If they hit us before we release the evidence, this was all for nothing. Lena's mind raced through scenarios, calculating risks and probabilities. We need a distraction, something to delay them, buy us time to get the evidence distributed. I'm open to suggestions, Adrian said, still coordinating release protocols on his phone. Call the police, report suspicious activity, armed men in vehicles surrounding the building. Diego laughed bitterly. You want to call corrupt cops to save us from corrupt cops? I want to call legitimate cops and force the corrupt ones to either blow their cover or abort the assault. If patrol units respond to a suspicious activity call, Torres's people can't launch an armed attack without exposing themselves to witnesses. Adrian considered this. It buys time, but it also brings law enforcement directly to a facility I've been running off the books. The moment cops arrive, this building becomes a crime scene. You said you were willing to accept consequences. Here they are. Fair point. Adrian nodded to Diego. Make the call. Anonymous tip about armed men staking out an abandoned building. Let's see how they respond. Diego pulled out a burner phone and made the call, his voice perfectly calibrated to sound like a nervous citizen reporting suspicious activity. After he hung up, they waited, watching security feeds and monitoring police scanners. 8 minutes later, 2 patrol cars appeared, approaching the surveillance vehicles with lights off but clearly investigating. The vehicles scattered immediately. Professional criminals knew better than to stick around when police arrived, even if those police might be corrupt. That bought us maybe an hour, Diego said. Once the patrol units clear the area, Torres's people will regroup and return, probably with more firepower. Then we work fast. Adrian returned to coordinating the release, his fingers flying across his phone. Diego, get everyone in the facility to secure positions. I want defensive perimeters established and escape routes prepared. If they hit us before we finish, I want options. What about Detective Cross? She can't run, can't fight. I stay with the evidence, Lena said firmly. If they break through, if they get to me, I'll make sure the evidence still gets out, even if I don't. Heroic, but unnecessary, Adrian said. We're all walking out of this alive. That's non-negotiable. The next 90 minutes passed in organized chaos. Adrian coordinated simultaneous uploads to secure servers, while his IT specialists configured distribution networks. Journalists received encrypted files with embargo times. Federal prosecutors were sent legal briefs with instructions to open at precisely 9 p.m. Public platforms were prepared to release comprehensive summaries across social media, forums, and alternative media sites. Lena worked through pain and exhaustion, writing statements and creating documentation that would guide investigators through the labyrinth of corruption. Her hands shook as she typed, whether from medication or adrenaline or the knowledge that they were about to declare war on an entire system of power. Diego monitored security feeds constantly, watching for the return of surveillance vehicles. The patrol units had cleared the area, but Torres's people hadn't come back yet. The waiting felt worse than action, knowing an attack was coming, but not knowing when. At 8:45 p.m., Adrian looked up from his phone. Distribution networks are ready. Everything uploads in 15 minutes. Once it starts, there's no stopping it. Any word from the journalists? Lena asked. 3 confirmed they've received files and are preparing stories. The 4th hasn't responded yet. Adrian's jaw tightened. We proceed with or without full confirmation. What about federal authorities? FBI Public Corruption Division confirmed receipt. Organized crime prosecutors are reviewing materials now. Inspector General's office acknowledged the files but hasn't committed to action yet. Adrian set down his phone. It's not perfect, but it's enough. When this goes public, they'll have to act or face accusations of complicity. The security monitors flashed red. Diego swore viciously. They're back! 4 vehicles this time, approaching from different directions. This is it. Adrian drew his weapon, checking the magazine with practiced efficiency. How long until they're in position? 3 minutes, maybe less. Then we finish this. Adrian pulled up the release protocols on his phone, his finger hovering over the confirmation button. Diego, get everyone to defensive positions. Lena, you stay here with the evidence. If they breach this room, you know what to do. Lena clutched a USB drive containing complete copies of everything, her insurance policy if the facility was overrun. I know. Adrian started toward the door, then stopped. He turned back to Lena, his expression unreadable. For what it's worth, Detective Cross, working with you has been the most interesting week of my life. Likewise, Mr. Voss. Now go make sure we survive to see the consequences of our choices. He left, and Lena was alone with monitors showing approaching vehicles and the countdown timer on Adrian's phone showing 12 minutes until release, 12 minutes between exposure and oblivion. 12 minutes to either change everything or die trying.
The facility's emergency lights flickered as power was cut. Same tactic used at the bank, meant to create confusion and disable security systems. But Adrian had prepared for this, installing backup generators that kicked in immediately. Harsh fluorescent lighting painted everything in stark relief as alarms began wailing throughout the building. Lena heard gunfire, sharp cracks echoing through corridors as Adrian's security team engaged the assault force. She gripped the USB drive tighter, watching the timer count down. 10 minutes, 9 minutes, 8 minutes. The recovery room door burst open. Lena's hand moved to the weapon Adrian had given her, but she relaxed slightly when she saw Maria rushing in with a medical bag. "You're still here?" Lena asked. "Where else would I be? You think I abandoned patients during armed assaults?" Maria moved to the monitors, checking vitals with practiced efficiency, even as gunfire rattled closer. "Besides, someone needs to keep you alive until this insanity ends. You should evacuate. Get to safety." "There is no safety, Detective. Not for any of us." "Not anymore." Maria's hands trembled slightly as she adjusted IV lines. "Whatever you and Adrian are doing, whatever evidence you're releasing, it better be worth people dying for." "It is. I promise it is." More gunfire, louder now, shouting voices, the sound of breaking glass. The assault force was pushing deeper into the facility despite Diego's defensive positions. 6 minutes on the timer. The door burst open again. This time, it wasn't Maria. Captain Richard Dawson stood in the doorway, weapon drawn, his face twisted with rage and desperation. Behind him, 2 officers in tactical gear swept the room before taking positions by the door. "Detective Cross," Dawson said, his voice carrying false warmth that made Lena's skin crawl. "Thank God you're alive. We've been so worried since Derek's death." "Save it, Captain. I know you sent him to kill me." Derek was confused, traumatized. He made terrible mistakes. Dawson stepped closer, his weapon trained on Lena. "But it's not too late to fix this. Give me the evidence. Come back to the department. We'll protect you, get you the help you need after your ordeal." "The help being a bullet, I assume." "Don't be dramatic. We're the good guys here, Lena. We're trying to restore order to a city drowning in chaos created by criminals like Adrian Voss." Dawson gestured around the facility. "Look at where you are. A criminal medical facility run by the mob. You've been brainwashed, manipulated into working against your own department. My own department tried to execute me in an alley. Derek's actions don't represent the entire force. Most officers are good people trying to do difficult jobs in impossible circumstances." Dawson's expression hardened. "But you're making it impossible for them. The evidence you've gathered, the accusations you're preparing to make, it'll destroy careers, ruin families, undermine public trust in law enforcement. Maybe law enforcement deserves to have its trust undermined when it's systematically corrupt." 4 minutes on the timer. "Give me the USB drive, Lena. Last chance." Lena's hand tightened around the drive. "Come take it." Dawson's weapon shifted slightly, no longer aimed at her chest, but at Maria. "I don't want to hurt anyone else, but I will. Give me the drive or Dr. Rivera dies." Maria's face went white, but she didn't move from her position beside Lena's bed. "Don't give him anything, Detective." "Admirable loyalty, Doctor. Misplaced, but admirable." Dawson's finger moved to the trigger. 3 seconds. 1, 2. The lights went out. Not the emergency power failure from the assault. This was deliberate, controlled. Adrian's people cutting power to create an opening. In the sudden darkness, Lena rolled off the surgical table, ignoring the agony that exploded through her abdomen. She hit the floor hard, feeling stitches tear, but her hand still gripped the USB drive. Gunfire erupted, muzzle flashes strobing the darkness like lightning. Maria screamed. Someone fell heavily. Lena crawled toward where she'd last seen Maria, her body screaming in protest but determination overriding pain. The emergency lighting kicked back on, revealing carnage. One of Dawson's tactical officers lay dead, taken out by Diego, who stood in the doorway with his weapon still raised. The other officer was down, wounded. Dawson himself crouched behind an overturned equipment cart, his weapon searching for targets. "Maria!" Lena spotted the doctor huddled against the far wall, unharmed but terrified. Relief flooded through her. 2 minutes on the timer. "It's over, Dawson," Diego said, advancing into the room. "The evidence uploads in 2 minutes. By the time you could possibly stop it,
The entire world will know everything. Then I'll kill everyone here and disappear before the fallout hits, Dawson snarled, starting with the detective who caused all this. He swung his weapon toward Lena. Adrian appeared in the doorway like a vengeful ghost, his weapon already firing. 3 shots perfectly placed. Dawson's body jerked with each impact before crashing to the floor, his weapon clattering away. "Clear the room," Adrian ordered Diego. "Get Dr. Rivera to safety and secure the perimeter. I want to know if any more hostiles are in the building." Diego moved immediately, helping a shaking Maria to her feet and guiding her toward the door. Adrian crossed to Lena, who still lay on the floor clutching the USB drive, blood spreading from her reopened wound. "You're bleeding again," Adrian said, kneeling beside her. "Notice that, did you?" Lena's laugh came out pained. "How many times can Maria restitch me before I just fall apart entirely? Let's not find out." Adrian checked the timer on his phone. 90 seconds. "We made it." "We're not done yet. Torres is still out there. His network is still operational." "Not for long." Adrian helped Lena into a sitting position, supporting her weight. "The moment that evidence goes public, Torres's entire operation collapses. The corrupt cops protecting him will be too busy trying to save themselves. His political connections will evaporate. His financial networks will be frozen pending investigation. He'll have nowhere to run and no one to help him." 60 seconds. Lena clutched Adrian's arm, suddenly aware of how close they were, how much blood stained both of them, how impossible their alliance had been from the start. "What happens to us after this? After the evidence breaks? After the investigations start?" "I'll likely be arrested. My organization will be dismantled. I've accepted that. And me? You'll be a hero. The detective who exposed systematic corruption despite overwhelming odds. They'll probably give you a medal." "I don't want a medal. I want to know you'll be okay." Adrian's expression softened. "Why?" "I'm a criminal, remember? The kind of man you spent 15 years trying to arrest. You're also the man who saved my life when every logical reason told you not to. The man who chose to destroy his own empire rather than let corruption continue. That counts for something." 30 seconds. "Detective Cross, are you getting sentimental about a crime boss?" "Maybe I am. Maybe almost dying twice makes you reconsider what actually matters." 15 seconds. Adrian's phone chimed. On the screen, upload progress bars filled to 100%. Simultaneously, notifications began flooding in. Journalists confirming receipt and publication, federal prosecutors acknowledging evidence and opening investigations, social media exploding with revelations about police corruption and criminal conspiracy. The evidence was out, irreversible, unstoppable. "We did it," Lena breathed. Adrian looked at his phone, watching his empire and his enemies burn together in the fire they'd deliberately lit. "Yes, we did." Outside, sirens wailed. Real police response this time. Federal authorities mobilizing, news helicopters circling overhead. The facility that had been a secret refuge was now the epicenter of the biggest corruption scandal in the city's history. And inside that facility, surrounded by bodies and blood and the ruins of everything they'd both known, a cop and a crime boss sat together and watched the world change. The federal agents arrived 12 minutes after the evidence went live. They came in force: FBI, U.S. Marshals, ATF agents coordinating with local SWAT teams who looked confused about whether they were rescuing someone or executing a raid. Helicopters circled overhead, searchlights painting the facility in harsh white light, while news cameras captured everything from a distance the authorities couldn't quite prevent. Adrian stood with his hands raised as agents flooded through the facility, weapons drawn, shouting commands that echoed through blood-stained corridors. Beside him, Diego and the remaining security personnel assumed the same position, surrender without resistance, exactly as Adrian had ordered once the evidence uploaded. "Adrian Voss?" A tall woman in an FBI windbreaker approached, her weapon holstered but her hand resting on it. "I'm Special Agent Rebecca Morrison, FBI Public Corruption Division. You're under arrest for—" She paused, consulting a tablet. "Actually, we're still compiling the list. It's extensive." "I imagine it is," Adrian said calmly. "You'll find Detective Lana Cross in the medical recovery room. She's injured and needs immediate hospital attention." "The detective who supposedly died a week ago, the one whose evidence just broke the internet?" Morrison's expression suggested she'd seen too much in the past hour to be surprised by anything. We've got paramedics standing by, but first I need to secure the scene and determine exactly what happened here. Captain Richard Dawson attempted to kill Detective Cross to prevent the evidence from being released. He's dead in the recovery room along with 2 officers who assisted him. My people acted in self-defense. Morrison studied him with sharp eyes that missed nothing. You're being remarkably cooperative for someone facing decades in prison. I'm being pragmatic, Agent Morrison. The evidence is public. My organization is finished. Fighting now would be pointless and get more people killed. Adrian's gaze never wavered. But Detective Cross needs medical attention immediately. Whatever happens to me, she survives. That's non-negotiable. You don't get to negotiate, Mr. Voss. I'm not negotiating. I'm stating a condition that serves everyone's interests. Lena Cross is the hero of this story, the detective who risked everything to expose corruption. Letting her die from medical complications after everything she survived would be catastrophic for the Bureau's public image. Morrison's jaw tightened, but she spoke into her radio. Get paramedics to the recovery room. Priority 1. Then to Adrian. On your knees. Hands behind your head. Adrian complied without resistance. Cold metal closed around his wrists as Morrison read him his rights. Words he'd heard countless times in movies and television, but never thought would apply to him. Around him, his people were similarly detained, the facility transforming from secret refuge to federal crime scene in minutes. They led him through corridors where he'd once walked freely, past rooms where he'd made decisions that shaped the city's criminal landscape. Every step felt like walking away from 15 years of his life, leaving behind an empire that had defined his identity. In the recovery room, chaos reigned. Paramedics worked on Lena while federal agents documented the scene. Dawson's body, the tactical officers Adrian had killed, blood and bullet casings painting a picture of violence barely contained. Maria stood against the wall, hands cuffed, her medical expertise ignored now that she was classified as an accessory to criminal operations. Lena's eyes found Adrian's as agents led him past. Even pale with blood loss, even being loaded onto a stretcher, her expression carried fierce determination. Adrian, she started. Don't say anything without a lawyer, he interrupted. Not to anyone, not even to help me. Understand? But I made my choices, detective. You made yours. Let them stand separately. His voice softened despite the federal agents surrounding them. You did good work. The corruption is exposed. People will face justice. That's what matters. Mr. Voss, stop talking to the witness, Morrison ordered, physically stepping between them. Detective Cross, you're being transported to Metropolitan Hospital under protective custody. We have questions, but they can wait until you're stable. I want to give a statement, Lena insisted, trying to sit up despite paramedics pushing her back down. Everything that happened will wait until you're not bleeding through bandages, Morrison said firmly. Right now, you're a victim and a witness. We'll get your statement when a doctor clears you for questioning. They wheeled Lena toward the exit, and Adrian watched her go. This impossible woman who'd survived execution, betrayal, and an alliance with her natural enemy. She'd changed everything, broken open a system that had seemed unbreakable, and somehow survived the explosion. Touching moment, Morrison said dryly. Crime boss and heroic detective. The media is going to have a field day with this partnership. It wasn't a partnership, it was necessity. Sure, that's why you destroyed your own organization to help her expose corruption. Morrison gestured for agents to take Adrian toward the exit. You're going to federal holding while we process this mess. Fair warning, every agency with jurisdiction wants a piece of you. FBI, ATF, DEA, local prosecutors. You're about to become very popular. I look forward to it. They led him outside into a circus of lights and cameras and shouting reporters held back by police barricades. Questions flew like bullets. Mr. Voss, did you kidnap Detective Cross? Is it true you killed Captain Dawson? Were you running a criminal medical facility? Adrian kept his expression neutral, giving them nothing, as agents loaded him into an unmarked SUV. The drive to federal holding took 30 minutes through streets that had once belonged to his network. Adrian watched the city pass, seeing familiar corners where deals had been made, buildings his shell companies owned, neighborhoods where his influence had shaped commerce and crime in equal measure, all of it slipping away like water through fingers. At the federal building, they processed him with bureaucratic efficiency. Fingerprints, photos, inventorying personal effects. Adrian submitted to it all with the same calm acceptance he'd shown at the facility. Fighting was pointless. The evidence was public. His empire was burning. All that remained was facing consequences. They locked him in an interrogation room. Gray walls, metal table, chairs bolted to the floor. Classic federal intimidation setup designed to make suspects feel small and isolated. Adrian sat quietly, knowing the waiting was part of the strategy. Let him sit alone with his thoughts. Let anxiety build. Let the walls close in until cooperation seemed like escape. He'd run this exact playbook on others countless times. It wouldn't work on him. 2 hours passed before Morrison entered with another agent, older, harder, carrying files that suggested extensive preparation. "Mr. Voss, this is Special Agent Frank Reeves, Organized Crime Division," Morrison said, settling into the chair across from him. "We've been reviewing the evidence Detective Cross compiled. It's damning for a lot of people, including you." "I assumed it would be." 23 officers identified as corrupt, Reeves continued, opening a file. "Financial records showing systematic money laundering, evidence of operations you've been running for years. We've got enough to put you away for life several times over." "Then why are we talking?" "Book me and let's skip the theater." Morrison leaned forward. "Because you helped expose the corruption. Because you protected Detective Cross when you could have let her die. Because the evidence suggests you were being framed by Michael Torres and his network." She paused. "That buys you nothing legally, but it gives you options." "What kind of options?" "Cooperation. Full disclosure about your organization, your operations, your associates. Help us dismantle what's left of your network, and we can talk to prosecutors about reduced sentences." Adrian smiled without humor. "You want me to become an informant, to betray everyone who ever worked for me in exchange for a slightly shorter prison term?" "I want you to make the smart choice," Morrison said. "Torres is still out there. His political connections run deep. Without your testimony about how he orchestrated the frame job, he might actually walk. Do you want that?" "What I want is irrelevant. I made decisions, took actions, built a criminal enterprise. Those facts don't change regardless of Torres's manipulation." Adrian met her eyes steadily. "I'll answer questions about Torres, about Meridian Solutions, about the corruption network that used my reputation as cover. But I won't hand you my organization on a platter. The people who worked for me did so because I offered protection and loyalty. I won't betray that now." Reeves slammed his hand on the table. "You think you're being noble? You're a criminal, Voss. Your organization destroyed lives, distributed drugs, facilitated violence. Protecting the people who helped you do that isn't loyalty. It's enabling more crime." "Perhaps, but it's my choice to make." Morrison and Reeves exchanged glances, some silent communication passing between them. Finally, Morrison spoke. "Detective Cross is giving her statement right now. Everything that happened from the moment you found her in that alley to the shootout at your facility. That includes detailed information about your operations, your people, your methods." She watched for his reaction. "She's a cop, Voss. A good one. She's not going to protect your organization just because you saved her life." Something twisted in Adrian's chest. Not quite betrayal, because Lena had never promised to protect him, but disappointment that their temporary alliance hadn't bought even minimal consideration. Then again, why should it? She'd been clear from the start about who she was and what she represented. "Then you don't need my cooperation," Adrian said evenly. "You'll have everything from Detective Cross." "We need corroboration, verification, details only someone inside could provide." Morrison leaned back. "Look, I get it. You built something, maintained order in your world through codes and loyalty. But that world is over. The evidence destroyed it. All that remains is damage control and choosing which version of Adrian Voss history remembers. And what versions am I choosing between? The criminal who exploited corruption for profit, or the man who helped destroy that corruption when he discovered its true depth?" Morrison's voice carried unexpected sincerity. "I've been investigating organized crime for 15 years. I've seen hundreds of criminals justify their actions, rationalize their choices. You're different. You actually made a sacrifice. That's rare enough to matter." "Your flattery won't change my answer, Agent Morrison." "It's not flattery, it's assessment." She stood gathering files. Think about it. We're charging you tomorrow morning regardless, but what you tell us between now and then determines how federal prosecutors approach your case. They left him alone again. Hours crawled past. No clock, no windows, no way to mark time except the slow progression from exhaustion to something approaching meditation. Adrian had spent his life in motion, making decisions, directing operations, staying 3 moves ahead of everyone. Forced stillness felt like drowning. His thoughts kept returning to Lena. Was she at the hospital now, recovering from surgery while federal agents questioned her? Was she in pain? Did she regret their alliance now that its consequences had materialized? He'd saved her life, but in doing so, he'd pulled her into a maelstrom that had cost her partner, her career certainty, and nearly her life 3 more times. Some rescue. The door opened again near midnight, but this time it wasn't Morrison or Reeves. Special agent in charge William Bradford entered, senior enough that his presence meant something significant. "Mr. Voss," Bradford said, his voice carrying authority that needed no emphasis, "I've spent the evening reviewing the evidence your Detective Cross compiled. It's remarkable work. Detailed, methodical, absolutely devastating." "She's not my detective." "No? The way you protected her, the resources you dedicated to keeping her alive, the empire you burned to expose corruption on her behalf, suggests otherwise." Bradford sat across from him. 23 arrests made in the past 6 hours. Officers in custody, others fleeing. Captain Dawson's entire network collapsing as everyone scrambles to make deals. And Michael Torres caught trying to board a private jet to the Cayman Islands. We have you to thank for that. You have Detective Cross to thank. I just provided resources. You provided much more than resources. You provided legitimacy to a story that otherwise looked like a cop's revenge fantasy against her partner. Bradford opened a tablet showing Adrian news coverage, every major outlet running stories about the corruption scandal. Lena's photo prominently displayed alongside headlines about heroic detective and exposing systematic crime. Without your involvement, without the evidence trail showing Torres framing you, this would have been dismissed as internal department drama. You made it impossible to ignore. Is there a point to this conversation, Agent Bradford? The point is that you have more leverage than you realize. Torres is claiming he's innocent, that the evidence was fabricated, that corrupt cops worked independently. Without your testimony about how he orchestrated the frame job, we might not be able to prove the full scope of his involvement. Let me guess. You want me to flip on Torres in exchange for consideration. I want you to help us ensure that the man who killed your friend Marcus Chen, who tried to destroy your organization while using it as a shield, who orchestrated corruption that damaged this entire city. I want you to help us make sure he faces consequences. Bradford's voice hardened. We can get Torres on money laundering, conspiracy charges, but murder? The systematic corruption? That requires your testimony. Adrian considered this. Marcus's face flashed through his mind. His oldest friend, executed as a message. His wife and daughters left grieving without understanding why. If Adrian's testimony could ensure Torres faced full consequences. What are you offering? Reduced sentence recommendation to federal prosecutors. Protective custody during trial proceedings. Consideration for the role you played in exposing the corruption. Bradford paused. It's not freedom, Mr. Voss. But it's not dying in prison either. I want guarantees for my people. Diego, Maria, everyone who worked in the facility. They followed my orders, acted on my authority. They don't deserve the same sentence I get. I can't promise immunity for everyone. Then we have nothing to discuss. Adrian started to stand. Wait. Bradford raised a hand. I can recommend reduced charges for those who cooperated, who acted in defense during the assault on your facility. Self-defense is still valid even in criminal enterprises. And Detective Cross? What happens to her? She's being treated as a protected witness and returning hero. Her actions will likely be commended despite the questionable alliance with you. Bradford studied him. Why do you care? She's a cop. Your natural enemy. Because she refused to give up even while dying. Because she chose justice over survival. Because she deserves to come through this without her career destroyed by politics and optics. Adrian met Bradford's eyes. I'll testify against Torres, provide everything you need to bury him. But I want written confirmation that Detective Cross faces no repercussions for working with me. No disciplinary action, no investigation into whether she violated policy. She stays a hero. That's not my jurisdiction. Make it your jurisdiction. You're senior enough to make recommendations that local departments follow. I want Lena Cross protected. Adrian's voice carried absolute finality. That's my price for cooperation. Take it or leave it. Bradford was silent for a long moment, clearly calculating whether the demand was worth what Adrian offered. Finally, he nodded. I'll make the recommendations. Can't guarantee local politics won't interfere, but I'll do what I can. Then I'll tell you everything about Torres, about Meridian Solutions, about how he built his corruption network while framing mine. Adrian settled back into his chair. But I want to see Detective Cross first. Verify she's actually protected before I give you ammunition against Torres. She's at Metropolitan Hospital under guard, not exactly accessible for criminal suspects. Then make her accessible. You want my cooperation? You give me 5 minutes with her. Supervised, recorded, whatever conditions you need, but I talk to her before I talk to prosecutors. Bradford stood, clearly unhappy, but recognizing he'd gotten most of what he came for. I'll see what I can arrange. Meanwhile, you're being transferred to federal holding with better accommodations than this interrogation room. Consider it a gesture of good faith. After Bradford left, guards transferred Adrian to a proper holding cell, small but clean with an actual bed instead of metal bench. The upgrade from interrogation room to cell felt like progress and defeat simultaneously. He was officially in the system now, no longer a free man negotiating from strength, but a prisoner bargaining from weakness. Sleep didn't come. Adrian lay on the narrow bed, staring at ceiling tiles and thinking about choices and consequences and the strange path that had led him from finding a dying cop in an alley to destroying everything he'd built. Part of him questioned whether he'd made the right decision. The practical part that had survived 15 years in criminal enterprise screamed that saving Lena had been catastrophic miscalculation. But another part, the part he'd thought dead years ago, knew he'd make the same choice again. Some decisions transcended logic and survival. Some moments demanded humanity regardless of cost. Morning brought Bradford with news. Detective Cross has agreed to see you. 15 minutes, fully monitored, in her hospital room. You try anything, make any threats, say anything that compromises our investigation, and the deal's off. Understood. They transported him in chains, hands cuffed, ankles shackled, surrounded by federal marshals who looked like they hoped he'd try something. The drive to Metropolitan Hospital took 20 minutes through morning traffic, people heading to work completely unaware that the man in the unmarked van had just upended their city's power structure. The hospital was locked down, federal agents at every entrance, uniformed officers on every floor, news crews camped outside hoping for glimpses of the heroic detective. They brought Adrian in through loading docks, avoiding cameras, moving him through service corridors to a private floor where Lena recovered under guard. Her room was standard hospital issue, but filled with flowers, sent by citizens, fellow officers, even politicians jumping to align themselves with her heroism. Lena sat propped up in bed, looking better than she had at the facility, but still pale, still obviously in pain. An IV dripped medication while monitors tracked vitals that had nearly flatlined multiple times. She looked up as they brought Adrian in, her expression unreadable. 15 minutes, Bradford said, positioning himself near the door with 2 marshals. Conversation is being recorded for legal purposes. Adrian approached slowly, chains rattling with each step. They'd left him restrained. Bradford's message that despite the cooperation, Adrian remained dangerous. He stopped at the foot of Lena's bed, suddenly uncertain what to say to the woman who'd simultaneously saved and destroyed him. "You look better," he finally managed. "You look terrible," Lena replied, her voice rough but carrying familiar strength. "Federal holding doesn't agree with you." "It's not my preferred accommodation." Adrian glanced at Bradford and the marshals. "Can we have privacy?" "Not a chance," Bradford said. 15 minutes, fully monitored. Those were the terms. Lena's eyes never left Adrian's face. "They told me you agreed to testify against Torres, to help them build their case." "I did." "Why?" "You could have stayed silent, protected whatever's left of your organization." "Because Torres killed Marcus. Used my reputation as a shield while undermining everything I built. Because letting him walk after everything he orchestrated would be worse than prison." Adrian paused.
And because you deserve to see the corruption fully exposed. All of it. No half measures. You didn't have to do that for me. Maybe not, but I did anyway. Adrian shifted his weight, chains clinking. Bradford says you're being treated as a hero, that your career will survive this. My career was never in question. I exposed corruption, nearly died for it, survived against impossible odds. They're talking about commendations, promotions, turning my investigation into a model for anti-corruption training. Lena's expression darkened. While you face decades in prison for helping me, I faced decades for 15 years of criminal activity. Your investigation just accelerated the timeline. Don't minimize this, Adrian. You saved my life. You destroyed your empire to help expose the truth. You protected me when you could have let me die. That deserves more than prison. It deserves exactly what the law prescribes. I'm not innocent because I helped you, Lena. I'm still guilty of everything I did before finding you in that alley. She looked away, blinking back what might have been tears. I gave my statement. Everything that happened, everything I witnessed. The agent said my testimony about Torres, about the corruption network, will be crucial for prosecution. Good. Make sure Torres and everyone who enabled him faces full consequences. But I also told them about you, about your organization, your operations, your methods. Her voice cracked slightly. I had to. I'm a cop. I can't protect criminals just because they protected me. I know. I wouldn't expect you to. Adrian meant it, though hearing the confirmation still hurt more than he wanted to admit. You did your job, Detective Cross. That's all anyone can ask. My job is destroying you. Your job is pursuing justice. Sometimes that requires uncomfortable alliances. Adrian leaned forward as much as his chains allowed. Listen to me. What we did, the evidence release exposing the corruption, it mattered. People will face consequences who thought themselves untouchable. The system will be forced to confront its own rot. That's worth everything it cost. Is it worth your freedom? Freedom's an illusion anyway. I've been a prisoner of my choices for 15 years. At least now those choices led to something beyond profit and power. Adrian held her gaze. You changed things, Lena. Really changed them. Don't let guilt about my fate diminish that. Tears actually fell now, tracking down Lena's face. I should hate you. You're everything I fought against for 15 years, but I don't. I can't. Time's up, Bradford announced, moving toward them. Wait, Lena said urgently. Adrian, when this is over, when the trials finish, when you're... She stopped, unable to say imprisoned. I want to visit, to know you're okay. You're a hero cop. I'm a convicted criminal. That association would destroy everything you've built. I don't care. You should. Adrian smiled sadly. But I appreciate the sentiment. The marshals grabbed his arms, pulling him toward the door. Adrian looked back one final time, memorizing Lena's face, strong even while crying, defiant even while surrounded by flowers and federal guards and the trappings of heroism she'd earned through blood and determination. Thank you, he said quietly, for refusing to give up, for choosing truth over survival, for being impossible. Thank you for finding me in that alley, Lena replied, for making an impossible choice, for being human when logic said you shouldn't be. They led him away, and Adrian knew he'd likely never see her again, at least not as anything other than witness and defendant in courtrooms where their impossible alliance would be dissected by prosecutors and defense attorneys. She'd return to her life as a decorated detective. He'd begin whatever time remained in federal prison. But for 1 week, they'd been something unprecedented. Allies, partners, two people from opposite sides of every line who'd chosen to work together despite all logic and reason. That week had changed everything, exposed corruption, destroyed careers, saved lives, and ended others. And somehow, impossibly, it had mattered. The news coverage exploded over the following days. Every network ran continuous coverage of the corruption scandal. Arrests of officers, city officials fleeing, Michael Torres being led into federal court in chains. Lena's face appeared everywhere. The heroic detective who'd survived execution and exposed systematic corruption despite impossible odds. Adrian watched from federal holding, seeing his own face in the coverage. The notorious crime boss who'd helped expose the conspiracy, whose testimony was key to prosecuting Torres. Some outlets painted him as reluctant hero.
others as opportunists trying to reduce his sentence. The truth, as always, lived somewhere in the complicated middle. Torres's trial began 3 weeks later. Adrian testified for 2 days, providing detailed accounts of how Torres had orchestrated the frame job, how Meridian Solutions had operated, how corrupt officers had protected operations while attributing them to Adrian's network. Defense attorneys tried to discredit him. After all, what criminal's testimony could be trusted? But the evidence Lena had compiled corroborated everything Adrian said. The jury took 6 hours to convict Torres on all counts: conspiracy, money laundering, corruption, and 3 counts of murder, including Marcus Chen. The judge sentenced him to 4 consecutive life terms without possibility of parole. Adrian watched from the courtroom, satisfaction mixing with grief. Marcus was avenged. The corruption was exposed. Justice, for once, had actually happened. His own trial came next. Federal prosecutors brought charges on 15 counts ranging from racketeering to money laundering to conspiracy. Adrian pled guilty to all of them, accepting responsibility without attempt at mitigation. His attorney argued for reduced sentencing based on cooperation, but Adrian cut him off. "I did what I'm accused of," Adrian told the judge. "For 15 years, I built and ran a criminal enterprise. I facilitated illegal activities, corrupted legitimate businesses, and damaged this city in pursuit of power and profit. The fact that I eventually helped expose other corruption doesn't erase my own." The judge, a stern woman who'd seen thousands of criminals try to manipulate her, studied him for a long moment. "Mr. Voss, in my 30 years on the bench, I've rarely seen a defendant take full responsibility without excuses or justifications. That speaks well of you. However, it doesn't change the severity of your crimes or their impact on this community." She sentenced him to 22 years in federal prison, with possibility of parole after 15. Adrian accepted the sentence without reaction. 22 years meant he'd be in his 60s when released, if he survived that long. But it also meant the people who'd worked for him received lighter sentences. Diego got 8 years for his role in the organization. Maria got probation for the medical facility, her testimony about saving Lena's life, winning judicial sympathy. The others who'd been part of Adrian's network faced various outcomes based on their level of involvement and cooperation. Some walked with time served. Others faced years behind bars. But none received the life sentences that Torres and the corrupt officers got. That felt like victory, in its own way. They transferred Adrian to federal prison in Pennsylvania, medium security, far from the city that had been his kingdom. The first weeks were adjustment, learning institutional rhythms, establishing position among other inmates, adapting to life where he controlled nothing and owned less. Other prisoners recognized his name from news coverage. Some respected him for exposing corruption. Others viewed him as a snitch who'd betrayed criminal codes. Adrian navigated both perspectives with the same strategic thinking that had built his empire, making allies where useful and avoiding conflicts where possible. 3 months into his sentence, he received notification of a visitor. Adrian assumed it was his attorney. There were still asset forfeiture proceedings, civil suits from victims of his organization, endless legal complications to resolve. Instead, he walked into the visiting room to find Lena Cross sitting at a table, looking healthier than the last time he'd seen her, but carrying obvious discomfort with the prison environment. "Detective Cross," Adrian said, sitting across from her with the metal table between them. "This is unexpected. I told you I'd visit." Lena's voice carried the same strength he remembered, though something in her expression suggested the past 3 months hadn't been easy for her either. "How are you holding up?" "I'm alive. That's about the best prison review anyone can give." Adrian studied her, noting details. Civilian clothes instead of detective uniform, subtle shadows under her eyes suggesting sleep troubles, tension in her shoulders. "You look different." "I'm on leave from the department, medical and psychological evaluation after everything that happened." Lena's laugh came out bitter. "Apparently surviving execution, fighting off corrupt cops, and working with a crime boss qualifies as traumatic experience requiring therapeutic intervention." "Sounds reasonable to me." "It's bureaucratic nonsense designed to delay my return until the political situation stabilizes." She leaned forward slightly. "The department doesn't know what to do with me, Adrian. I'm a hero who violated dozens of policies, a detective who worked with criminals, a symbol of anti-corruption who can't be trusted to follow protocol." They'll bring you back eventually. You're too valuable not to. Maybe. Or maybe I don't want to go back. Lena's eyes met his. I spent 3 months thinking about everything that happened. About Derek's betrayal, about the systematic corruption I exposed, about how the department protected itself while officers died. And I realized something. The system I dedicated my life to protecting is fundamentally broken. That's disillusionment talking. Give it time. No, it's clarity. The system protected Torres, protected corrupt officers, protected itself while throwing individual cops to the wolves. I risked everything to expose that corruption. And what changed? Some officers got arrested. Torres went to prison. But the structures that enabled them? Still intact. The political networks? Still operational. The next Torres is already building the next corruption network. Adrian understood the despair in her voice. The same realization he'd had years ago when he decided that working within the system was futile. So what will you do? I don't know. That's why I'm here. Lena's hands twisted together, betraying nervousness her voice didn't show. You made an impossible choice in that alley. You saw someone dying and chose humanity over self-preservation. That choice cost you everything, but it also exposed corruption and saved lives. I can't stop thinking about that. Where are you going with this, Lena? I'm going to the place where I ask, what would you do differently if you could go back? Would you still save me, knowing it would destroy your empire and put you in prison for 20 years? Adrian considered the question seriously, not deflecting with easy answers. Would he make the same choice, knowing all the consequences? The loss of freedom, the destruction of everything he'd built 2 decades behind bars while the city moved on without him. Yes, he said finally. I'd make the same choice. Because some decisions aren't about logic or consequences. They're about who you are in the moment when everything hangs in balance. I could have walked away and stayed free, but I would have been a different person, someone who let an innocent woman die to protect his empire. I don't want to be that person. Tears welled in Lena's eyes. I shot Derek, my partner of 8 years. I put 2 bullets in him and watched him die. The department says it was justified, that I acted in self-defense, that he was trying to kill me. But I still see his face when I close my eyes. Still hear his voice from when we were actually partners, before the corruption destroyed him. Guilt is the price of being human. It means you still feel the weight of your choices. Does it get easier? The guilt, the memories, the knowledge that your actions cost lives? No, but you learn to carry it, to accept that doing the right thing sometimes requires doing terrible things. Adrian reached across the table, stopping just short of touching her hand, physical contact with visitors being prohibited. You survived, Lena. You exposed corruption that had been hidden for years. Officers who enabled Torres are in prison. The system was forced to confront its rot. That matters more than guilt. Tell that to Derek's daughters. Tell them their father died because his partner shot him. Tell them their father died because he chose corruption over integrity, because he tried to execute someone who threatened to expose that corruption. You didn't kill your partner, Lena. The system that corrupted him did. They sat in silence for a moment, 2 people bound by impossible circumstances, divided by the bars and barriers separating prisoner from free world. Finally, Lena spoke again. The department wants me to write a book, to turn my experience into some inspirational story about heroic cop overcoming corruption. Publishers are offering ridiculous amounts of money. Will you do it? I don't know. Feels like profiting from trauma, from Derek's death, from everything we went through. She met his eyes. Would you want your story told? The crime boss who saved a cop and helped destroy corruption. My story isn't inspirational, it's cautionary. 15 years building something through crime and violence, only to have it destroyed by a single choice to be human. Adrian smiled without humor. Not exactly the redemption arc publishers want. Maybe that's exactly the story people need. The complicated truth instead of sanitized hero narrative. Maybe. But that's your decision, not mine. I'm just a prisoner serving time for crimes I committed. Lena reached into her bag, pulling out a book. I brought you something. Figured prison libraries aren't exactly comprehensive. She slid it across the table. Marcus Chen's favorite novel, one Adrian remembered his friend recommending years ago. How did you? His wife told me. I visited her after Torres's conviction, wanted her to know that Marcus's death hadn't been meaningless. She said he always wanted you to read this, thought it would give you perspective. Lena's voice softened. She doesn't blame you for his death, Adrian. She knows Marcus chose to work with you, knew the risks. She just wanted you to know that he mattered. Adrian picked up the book, running his fingers over the cover that Marcus had touched. Grief welled up, fresh despite 3 months, sharp despite all the processing and acceptance. Thank you for visiting her, for making sure she knew. It was the least I could do. Lena stood, clearly struggling with the departure. I should go. Visiting hours end soon, and I've got therapy appointment tomorrow morning. Take care of yourself, detective. The guilt gets heavy, but it does get manageable. Will you accept more visits, or was this goodbye? Adrian looked at this impossible woman who'd crashed into his life and changed everything. Accepting more visits meant maintaining a connection that served neither of them. She needed to rebuild her career. He needed to serve his time. Clean breaks were cleaner, but clean had never defined their relationship. I'd like that, he said, if you're willing to make the drive. Every month, I'll bring books, news about the city, updates on the corruption trials. Lena smiled through tears. Someone needs to make sure you don't forget the world outside these walls. I won't forget. Not with you reminding me. She left, and Adrian returned to his cell with Marcus's book and the knowledge that some alliances survived even the impossible circumstances that created them. The months became years. Lena visited monthly like clockwork, bringing books and conversation and connection to the world beyond prison walls. She eventually returned to the department, not as a regular detective, but heading a new anti-corruption task force built on the foundation of her investigation. Her work continued exposing dirty cops and corrupt officials, each case methodical and devastating. Adrian served his time with the same strategic thinking that had built his empire. He avoided trouble, maintained useful alliances, and focused on the slow work of becoming someone beyond the crime boss he'd been. He read voraciously, philosophy, history, literature that Marcus had recommended. He took college courses through prison programs, earning degrees in subjects that interested him without regard for usefulness after release. And every month, Lena came. They talked about everything and nothing. Her cases, his reading, the city changing beyond his reach, the complicated legacy of their impossible alliance. Sometimes the conversations lasted hours. Sometimes they sat in comfortable silence, two people who'd survived hell together and somehow found peace in the aftermath. The world moved on. Torres died in prison, shivved by an inmate whose family had been destroyed by his corruption. Captain Dawson's name became synonymous with police corruption, used in training academies as example of how power corrupts without oversight. Derek Kane was quietly mourned by family while being officially condemned by the department. And in that moving world, Adrian Voss and Lena Cross maintained an alliance that made no logical sense but somehow endured anyway. Prisoner and cop, criminal and hero. Two impossible people bound by a choice made in an alley, by blood and bullets, and the refusal to surrender even when everything said surrender was rational. 15 years felt like eternity and heartbeat simultaneously. But knowing Lena would be there at the end, that someone remembered who he'd been, what he'd chosen, why it mattered, made the time bearable. Even behind bars, some choices remained valid. Some alliances survived everything. Some moments of humanity outweighed lifetimes of darkness. The parole hearing was scheduled for a Tuesday morning in March, 15 years to the day after Adrian had found Lena bleeding in that alley. He sat in the hearing room wearing the only suit he owned anymore, purchased by Lena and delivered 3 weeks prior with a note that simply read, "For when you walk out." The parole board consisted of 5 people who'd reviewed his file, read his testimony against Torres, examined 15 years of prison records documenting a model inmate who'd earned 2 degrees and taught literacy classes to other prisoners. Mr. Voss, the board chairwoman began, her reading glasses perched on her nose as she studied documents. You've served 15 years of a 22-year sentence for racketeering, money laundering, and conspiracy. Your prison record is exemplary. You've had no disciplinary incidents, completed educational programs, and by all accounts became a mentor to younger inmates. She looked up. Why should we grant parole? Adrian had prepared for this question, rehearsed answers with the prison counselor who'd guided him through the process, but in the moment, rehearsed words felt hollow. I don't know that you should, he said honestly. I committed serious crimes for 15 years before my arrest. I built a criminal enterprise that damaged countless lives in pursuit of profit and power. Serving 15 years doesn't erase that harm or make me deserving of freedom. The board members exchanged glances. Clearly his answer wasn't what they expected. Then why are we here? Another board member asked. Why request parole if you don't believe you deserve it? Because someone I respect believes I've earned a second chance. Because 15 years of reflection have shown me that the man who built that empire and the man I am now are different people. Because I want the opportunity to spend whatever time remains making different choices. Adrian met each board member's eyes in turn. I can't undo the past, but I can choose whether the future continues that pattern or breaks from it. You testified against Michael Torres and other corrupt officials, the chairwoman continued. That cooperation was noted in your sentencing. Do you believe that testimony entitles you to early release? No. I testified because Torres killed my friend and used my organization as cover for his corruption. That was personal, not altruistic. I don't consider helping destroy someone who wronged me as worthy of reward. What about Detective Lena Cross? Your file indicates she's visited you monthly for 15 years. That's an unusual relationship between a former criminal and the detective who helped bring him down. Adrian chose his words carefully. Detective Cross and I formed an alliance under impossible circumstances. She was investigating corruption within her own department. I was being framed by that same corruption. We helped each other survive, and in the process, exposed systematic criminal activity that might otherwise have continued indefinitely. Our continued relationship is built on mutual respect for choices made under pressure. She submitted a letter supporting your parole, the chairwoman said, holding up a document. Would you like to know what it says? If you think it's relevant, the chairwoman read aloud. Adrian Voss made a choice 15 years ago that cost him everything. He could have walked past me dying in that alley. Instead, he saved my life and helped expose corruption that reached into police departments, city government, and criminal organizations. He destroyed his own empire to ensure justice was served. That choice defines his character more than the 15 years of criminal activity that preceded it. He deserves the opportunity to build something better with the time he has left. I support his parole without reservation. The chairwoman set down the letter. Strong endorsement from someone who spent her career fighting organized crime. Detective Cross has always been generous in her assessment of my choices. Are you in a romantic relationship with her? The question came from a younger board member, clearly suspicious of the monthly visits and supportive letter. No, Adrian said firmly. Our relationship is built on shared experience and mutual respect. Nothing more. Detective Cross has her life, her career, her calling. I'm a convicted criminal serving time for serious offenses. Romance would complicate what works as friendship. The questioning continued for another 30 minutes, probing his plans for reintegration, his job prospects with a felony record, his intentions regarding any remaining criminal contacts. Adrian answered everything honestly, offering no excuses and making no promises he couldn't guarantee. Finally, the chairwoman spoke. We'll review your case and notify you of our decision within 2 weeks. You're dismissed, Mr. Voss. Back in his cell, Adrian tried to manage expectations. Parole was never guaranteed, especially for organized crime convictions. The board might decide 15 years wasn't enough, that he posed too great a risk, that his testimony against Torres had been self-serving rather than genuinely cooperative. He'd survive regardless. He'd built a life within these walls, teaching literacy, mentoring younger inmates, finding purpose beyond the empire he'd lost. Freedom would be welcome, but it wasn't necessary for meaning. 10 days later, a guard appeared at his cell. Voss, you've got a visitor. Legal meeting room. Adrian assumed his attorney, probably with news about the parole decision. Instead, he found Lena waiting, looking older than her monthly visits usually revealed. Gray, threading through her dark hair, lines around her eyes that suggested years of difficult decisions. They granted parole, she said before he could even sit. I called in every favor I had, contacted board members personally, made it clear that your release served public interest. You're getting out in 3 weeks. Adrian sank into the chair across from her, the news taking several seconds to fully register. 3 weeks. April 5th. You'll be on parole supervision for 7 years with standard conditions. Regular check-ins, employment requirements, no contact with known criminals. Lena's smile was complicated, mixing joy with something that looked like anxiety. You're free, Adrian, or as free as someone can be after 15 years inside. Why did you do that? Call in favors? Pressure the board? Because 15 years is enough. Because you've done the work, changed fundamentally, earned the chance to build something beyond these walls. Lena leaned forward. And because I made you a promise in that hospital room 15 years ago. I promised we'd see justice done. For Marcus, for me. For everyone, the corruption hurt. Justice includes recognizing when punishment has served its purpose. The victims of my organization might disagree with that assessment. The victims of your organization received restitution from your seized assets. The people you employed found different paths. The neighborhoods you controlled have been rebuilt through legitimate development. Lena's voice carried absolute conviction. You paid your debt, Adrian. Time to collect on the life you've got left. 3 weeks felt simultaneously infinite and instantaneous. Adrian prepared for release with the same methodical planning he'd once used for criminal operations. Securing identification documents, arranging temporary housing through a halfway house, connecting with employment services for ex-offenders. The prison counselor who'd guided him through parole preparation helped coordinate everything, impressed by how thoroughly Adrian approached reintegration. On his last day, inmates he'd taught and mentored gathered to say goodbye. Some thanked him for helping them learn to read, skills that made prison time less isolating. Others appreciated the advice he'd given about life after release, about making different choices, about accepting that the past couldn't be changed, but the future remained unwritten. You really think it's possible? One young inmate asked, starting over after everything we've done? I think it's the only option that matters, Adrian replied. You can let your worst choices define you forever, or you can make different choices going forward. The past is fixed. The future is negotiable. Diego was released 3 years earlier and had successfully rebuilt his life managing a legitimate security company. He'd visited twice, both times expressing gratitude for how Adrian had protected him during testimony and sentencing. Now he waited outside the prison gates with a car and a job offer. Boss, Diego said as Adrian walked through those gates into spring sunlight that felt harsh after 15 years of artificial lighting. Good to see you on this side of the fence. Don't call me boss anymore. That person doesn't exist. Fair enough. Diego gestured to the car. I've got an apartment set up for you. Nothing fancy, but it's clean and close to the halfway house where you'll check in daily. Job waiting too, if you want it. Security consulting, completely legitimate. Corporations pay good money for people who understand how criminals think. Using my criminal expertise for legal purposes. There's irony in that. There's also rent money and parole requirements satisfied, unless you've got better offers. Adrian looked at the world beyond prison walls, traffic and buildings and people moving through lives he'd been separated from for 15 years. Technology had advanced, culture had shifted, the city had changed in ways both subtle and profound. He was a stranger in a familiar place, released into a world that had moved on without him. I'll take the job, he said, and the apartment. Thank you, Diego. They drove through streets Adrian remembered but barely recognized. Neighborhoods he'd once controlled had been redeveloped. The blighted properties Torres had bought and sold, now housing legitimate businesses and residential developments. The corruption's destruction had created space for renewal, though Adrian took no pride in that. Renewal built on ashes still carried the smell of burning. The halfway house was exactly what he expected. Institutional but not hostile, designed to bridge the gap between prison and free society. Adrian checked in with his parole officer, provided documentation of his employment with Diego's company, and received the standard warnings about violating parole conditions. You've got 7 years of supervision, the parole officer said, a weary man who'd clearly seen hundreds of releases both successful and failed. Stay clean, maintain employment, check in regularly. Most people handle it fine. Some decide freedom means returning to old patterns. Don't be the second group. I've spent 15 years preparing not to be. That evening, alone in the small apartment Diego had secured, Adrian stood at the window watching the city light up against gathering darkness. 15 years ago, he'd owned pieces of this city, buildings and businesses and influence that shaped commerce and crime. Now he owned nothing but the chance to build something different. His phone buzzed with a text from Lena. Dinner tomorrow.
Want to celebrate your first full day of freedom? Adrian stared at the message, considering. Seeing Lena in prison had been safely contained, monitored visits, institutional boundaries, clear separation between her world and his incarceration. Meeting her outside those walls felt different, dangerous in ways he couldn't quite articulate. But he texted back anyway. Where and when? They met at a quiet restaurant far from downtown, neutral territory where neither Adrian's criminal past nor Lena's decorated law enforcement career would attract unwanted attention. She arrived first, wearing civilian clothes that suggested she'd come straight from her office at the Anti-Corruption Task Force. You look good, Lena said as Adrian slid into the booth across from her. Different out of prison clothes. I look old. 15 years inside ages you in ways that have nothing to do with calendars. But Adrian smiled. You look tired. The task force running you ragged? Always. Corruption doesn't sleep, so neither do the people fighting it. Lena ordered wine, then seemed to remember Adrian's parole conditions. Can you drink? I don't want to. I can drink. Parole doesn't require sobriety, just lawfulness. Adrian ordered whiskey, appreciating the server's complete lack of recognition. Being anonymous felt luxurious after 15 years of institutional identity. They talked through dinner about everything except the obvious. Lena's cases exposing new corruption networks, Adrian's adjustment to freedom, Diego's security company proving surprisingly successful. The conversation flowed with practiced ease built on 15 years of monthly visits, two people who knew each other's histories without needing constant reference. Finally, over coffee, Lena broached the subject they'd been avoiding. What are you going to do now? Long-term, beyond the parole requirements and security consulting? I don't know. That's honest, but unsatisfying. Adrian turned his coffee cup, watching steam rise. I spent 15 years building a criminal empire, then 15 years in prison contemplating what that empire cost. Now I've got maybe 20 years left if I'm lucky. Seems like I should do something meaningful with that time. Any ideas what meaningful looks like? Marcus's wife set up a foundation in his name, provides scholarships for kids from neighborhoods affected by crime and corruption. She asked if I'd join the board after release, help direct resources toward programs that actually work. Adrian met Lena's eyes. Ironic, right? Criminal helping fund anti-crime initiatives. Ironic but appropriate. But you understand how criminal networks operate, what vulnerabilities exist, where intervention could actually make a difference. Lena's expression softened. Marcus would have liked that. You honoring his memory by helping prevent others from making the choices that got him killed. I keep thinking about that night, finding you in the alley, making the choice to help despite every logical reason not to. Everything that followed, the alliance, the evidence release, Torres's conviction, 15 years inside, all of it stems from that one decision. Adrian's voice carried wonder at the cascading consequences. If I'd walked past you, if I'd let survival instinct override humanity, my empire would probably still exist. I'd still be free, still powerful, still trapped in patterns I convinced myself were necessary. You'd also be alone, isolated by power and paranoia, trusting no one, building nothing that lasted beyond profit margins. Lena reached across the table, her hand stopping just short of his. The same gesture from that first prison visit, maintaining distance while acknowledging connection. The empire you built collapsed, but what we created, the exposure of corruption, the changes to police oversight, the foundation in Marcus's name, that actually matters. Easy for you to say. You're a decorated detective heading an anti-corruption task force. I'm an ex-con working security consulting. You're the man who saved my life and helped change a city. Your past doesn't erase that, Adrian. Nothing erases that. They finished dinner and walked through streets that glowed with evening light. Two people whose lives had intersected impossibly and remained entangled despite every reason they shouldn't. At Lena's car, they paused, the farewell feeling weighted with unspoken possibilities. Can I ask you something? Lena said quietly. That parole board member asked if we were romantically involved. You said no, that our relationship was friendship built on shared experience. That's what I said. Was that the truth? Or was it the answer that made parole more likely? Adrian considered the question seriously, knowing that whatever he said next would define their relationship going forward. It was the truth as I understood it then. We're two people who survived hell together, who formed an alliance that made no logical sense but somehow worked,
who've maintained connection through 15 years of prison visits when every practical reason said we should have moved on. He paused. But if you're asking whether I've wondered about possibilities beyond friendship, yes, frequently, for years. Lena's breath caught. And now? Now that you're free, now that prison doesn't separate us, now that we're just two people standing on a street corner? Now I'm wondering if the woman who once hunted criminals could actually build something with one. If the impossible alliance could become something more impossible. Adrian's voice remained steady, despite his racing heart. But I won't pressure you. Won't assume that 15 years of visits means you want anything beyond what we already have. You've built an incredible career, Lena. You're a symbol of integrity fighting corruption. Getting involved with an ex-con could damage everything you've achieved. I don't care about optics or politics or what people think. Lena stepped closer, closing the distance between them. I care about the man who refused to let me die when logic said he should, who destroyed his empire to ensure justice was served, who spent 15 years becoming someone worth knowing beyond the criminal he'd been. Her hand finally made contact, fingers brushing his. I've wondered too, Adrian, for longer than I want to admit, about possibilities and futures and whether we could build something together. The department would lose their minds. Hero detective dating convicted crime boss. Let them. I spent 15 years fighting for what's right regardless of political pressure. Why stop now? Lena's smile carried defiance and hope in equal measure. Besides, I'm tired of being alone. Tired of maintaining walls between myself and genuine connection because it might complicate my career. Life's too short for that kind of careful distance. Adrian wanted to argue, to list all the reasons this was complicated and potentially destructive and would invite scrutiny neither of them needed. But standing there in evening light, Lena's hand warm against his, the arguments felt hollow compared to the possibility she was offering. We'd have to take it slow, he said. I'm still on parole, still rebuilding my life. I can't offer you anything close to what you deserve. You can offer honesty and presence and partnership built on surviving the impossible. That's more than most people find in a lifetime. Lena squeezed his hand. Slow is fine. We've waited 15 years. We can wait a little longer to figure out what this becomes. They stood there as the city moved around them, two people who'd been defined by an impossible alliance, now contemplating an equally impossible relationship. It felt terrifying and right simultaneously, the same combination of fear and certainty Adrian had experienced in that alley 15 years ago. Dinner again next week? He asked. Dinner, coffee, walks through the city, whatever we want. We're free to choose now. Lena pulled him into a hug, the first real physical contact they'd shared since the hospital room. Welcome back to the world, Adrian. Let's see what we can build with it. She drove away, and Adrian stood on the sidewalk feeling more alive than he had in 15 years. The future remained uncertain, parole requirements, career complications, the challenge of building genuine relationship after decades of isolation and institutional life. But uncertainty felt like possibility, and possibility felt like freedom. The months that followed established new rhythms. Adrian worked for Diego's security company, applying his understanding of criminal thinking to help corporations protect against threats. The work was legitimate and surprisingly fulfilling, using knowledge gained through darkness to prevent others from falling into similar patterns. He joined the board of Marcus Chen's Memorial Foundation, working with Marcus's wife to direct resources toward programs serving communities affected by crime. The irony of a former crime boss funding anti-crime initiatives wasn't lost on anyone, but Adrian's insights proved valuable. He understood which programs actually worked versus which sounded good, but accomplished nothing. And he dated Lena with the careful intention of someone who knew exactly how rare genuine connection was. They kept it private initially, avoiding media attention and department scrutiny. Dinners evolved into longer conversations. Walks through the city became explorations of rebuilt neighborhoods neither had seen during their respective incarcerations. Hers to the demands of anti-corruption work, his to actual prison. 6 months after his release, Lena invited him to an event at police headquarters, a memorial service for officers killed in the line of duty. Derek Kane's name appeared on the wall alongside others, his corruption and betrayal set aside in recognition of the 8 years he'd served honorably before falling. I needed to make peace with this, Lena said as they stood before Derek's name. He saved my life twice before trying to end it. He was my partner, my friend, before corruption destroyed him. I can hate what he became while mourning who he was. Complicated grief for complicated people. Sounds healthy. Adrian squeezed her hand. Think he'd approve of us? The Derek I knew before the corruption? Maybe. He always said I needed someone who understood darkness instead of pretending it didn't exist. Lena's smile was sad. But the Derek who tried to kill me? He'd probably see this as ultimate betrayal, cop-dating criminal. Good thing we're not seeking his approval. They left the memorial and walked through evening streets, past the alley where everything had started. Adrian paused, looking at the spot where he'd found Lena bleeding out, where a choice made in heartbeats had changed everything. You think about it? Lena asked, following his gaze. What your life would be if you'd walked past. Sometimes, I'd probably still be running my organization, still building power, still convinced that the empire mattered more than humanity. Adrian turned to face her. I'd have everything I thought I wanted and nothing that actually matters. Seems like a poor trade. Even with 15 years in prison? Even with that. Because those 15 years led to this. Standing here with you, building something genuine, having purpose beyond profit. He pulled her close. I wouldn't change it. Any of it. A year after his release, Diego approached Adrian with an opportunity. There's a nonprofit looking for someone to run re-entry programs for ex-offenders. Help people leaving prison find employment, housing, support systems. They want someone who actually understands the challenges rather than just reading about them in sociology textbooks. Why are you telling me this? Because you've been mentoring half the guys I hire, teaching them how to think strategically, how to rebuild lives, how to make different choices. Diego handed him a folder with job details. You're good at this, boss. Sorry, Adrian. You're good at helping people navigate life after prison. This position would let you do it full-time instead of squeezing it around security consulting. Adrian reviewed the materials. The salary was modest compared to what he'd made in criminal enterprise, or even what Diego paid for security work. But the purpose was undeniable. Direct impact on people facing the exact challenges he'd just navigated. It would mean leaving your company. My company will survive. This work is where you should be. Diego's expression carried rare emotion. You helped me build a legitimate life after prison. Let me return the favor by making it possible for you to help others do the same. Adrian took the position. The work was difficult, bureaucratic obstacles, funding limitations. The challenge of changing systems designed to recycle ex-offenders through incarceration rather than supporting genuine rehabilitation. But it was also deeply meaningful in ways that building a criminal empire had never been. He met with people leaving prison, helped them navigate parole requirements, connected them with employers willing to hire despite felony records, provided mentorship through the difficult transition from institutional life to freedom. Some succeeded. Others returned to prison, unable or unwilling to break patterns that felt comfortable despite their destructiveness. But each success felt like victory against a system designed to ensure failure. Each person who rebuilt their life represented proof that change was possible, that the past didn't have to define the future, that different choices could lead to different outcomes. Lena's anti-corruption task force continued dismantling networks of dirty cops and corrupt officials. Some investigations originated from evidence Adrian provided, his understanding of how criminal enterprises operated making him an unexpectedly valuable consultant to law enforcement. The arrangement raised eyebrows and generated criticism, but Lena defended it fiercely. Adrian Voss knows more about organized crime than anyone we could hire, she told reporters questioning the collaboration. He served his time, dedicated himself to legitimate work, and provides insights that help us prevent the kind of corruption he once participated in. Using his expertise isn't controversial, it's practical. 2 years after his release, they made their relationship public. The media coverage was predictably sensational. Hero detective dating former crime boss appeared in every outlet from tabloids to serious journalism. Some praised Lena's commitment to redemption and second chances. Others condemned her for betraying law enforcement values by dating a convicted criminal. The department launched an internal investigation into whether their relationship represented conflict of interest or violated ethics policies. Lena endured the scrutiny with the same defiant strength she'd shown throughout her career, refusing to apologize or justify her personal life to bureaucrats concerned more with optics than substance.
The investigation concluded that since Adrian was no longer engaged in criminal activity and Lena's task force didn't oversee his parole, their relationship violated no specific policies, though it remained inadvisable and potentially problematic for department image. Inadvisable and problematic, Lena repeated when she showed Adrian the findings. That's practically a ringing endorsement by bureaucratic standards. You're sure about this? Making us public? Dealing with the criticism? Risking your career for a relationship with an ex-con? I'm sure about you. Everything else is noise. Lena kissed him, fierce and determined. I didn't survive execution and expose corruption just to spend my life worried about what people think of my dating choices. 3 years after his release, Adrian received word that Maria had died. The doctor who'd saved his life and Lena's had struggled with addiction for years, the demons that cost her medical license eventually claiming her life through an overdose. Diego organized a small funeral, gathering the handful of people who'd known her beyond her failures. She saved us, Lena said at the service. When she could have refused, when helping us put her at risk, she chose to save lives instead. That matters more than the addiction that killed her. Adrian placed flowers on Maria's grave, grief mixing with gratitude. She told me once that I was changing, that saving you represented something different from the criminal I'd been. I didn't believe her then, but she was right. He took Lena's hand. She saw possibilities before I could. Wish she'd lived to see them realized. 4 years after his release, Marcus Chen's daughters approached Adrian. Both were adults now, one finishing medical school, the other working as a civil rights attorney. They'd grown up knowing their father had died connected to criminal activity, but never fully understanding the circumstances. Our mother told us the truth, the older daughter said during their meeting at a coffee shop, about your organization, about the corruption, about how you testified against Torres. We wanted to meet the man our father trusted enough to work with for 20 years. Adrian had dreaded this conversation for years. How could he face Marcus's children, knowing their father died because of associations Adrian had built, conflicts Adrian had created? I'm sorry, he said simply. Your father was the best man I knew. He deserved better than to die as a message in a corruption war. He chose to work with you, the younger daughter replied. Mom said he knew the risks, accepted them because he believed in loyalty and friendship. He wouldn't want you carrying guilt for choices he made freely. They talked for hours about Marcus, his humor, his wisdom, the values he'd instilled in his daughters. Adrian shared stories from their 20 years together, carefully editing out details too dark for daughters mourning their father. The conversation felt like absolution he hadn't earned but desperately needed. As they left, the older daughter turned back. The foundation you helped run in Dad's name, it gave me scholarship money for medical school. Without it, I couldn't have afforded tuition. So thank you for honoring his memory that way. Your father would have wanted nothing less. 5 years after his release, Adrian completed his parole supervision. The final meeting with his parole officer was brief. Review of 5 years without violations, acknowledgement of successful reintegration, formal discharge from supervision. You're one of the success stories, the parole officer said. Most people with your criminal history either return to prison or barely scrape by. You built something legitimate. That's rare. I had help. People who believed I could be more than my worst choices. Still had to do the work yourself. Don't minimize that. That evening, Lena organized a celebration dinner. Diego and his family, Marcus's wife and daughters, colleagues from Adrian's reentry program, friends accumulated over 5 years of legitimate life. It was small, intimate, filled with people who knew his past but chose to focus on his present. 5 years free, Diego toasted, and actually using that freedom for something good. Who would have thought? Not me, Adrian admitted. 15 years ago, I would have called this impossible. Ex-con working with law enforcement, helping other ex-offenders rebuild lives, dating a decorated detective. None of it makes sense. Best things in life rarely do, Lena said, squeezing his hand under the table. They just are. Later that night, alone in the apartment, Adrian had upgraded from the initial halfway house efficiency. He and Lena talked about futures no longer constrained by parole or institutional oversight. What do you want? She asked. Now that there are no restrictions, no supervision, nothing preventing you from going anywhere or doing anything? Adrian considered the question seriously.
I want to keep doing the work with ex-offenders. It matters, makes actual difference in people's lives. I want to stay involved with Marcus's foundation, honor my friend by helping prevent others from making our mistakes. He paused. And I want to build a life with you. Whatever that looks like, however complicated it gets. I want that too, have for years, honestly. Lena moved closer. But there's something we should discuss. I'm 47 years old, you're 57. If we're serious about building a life together, we need to talk about what that actually means. Marriage? Among other things, combining our lives completely instead of maintaining separate apartments and careful distance. Being public about us without qualification or apology. Building something that lasts beyond convenience or shared history. Adrian's heart raced despite 5 years of dating, despite countless conversations about futures and possibilities. Marriage felt like a step beyond redemption into genuine renewal. The crime boss and the cop who'd destroyed his empire becoming something neither had been separately. Yes, he said simply. To all of it. Marriage, combined lives, public commitment, whatever you want. What I want is you, complicated, redeemed, impossible you. Lena kissed him. Think the city can handle a wedding between a cop and an ex-crime boss? The city's handled stranger things. Might as well give them something new to talk about. They married 6 months later in a small ceremony that made every news outlet in the city. The coverage ranged from heartwarming redemption story to scandal, depending on the outlet's perspective, but Adrian and Lena ignored all of it. They'd spent years navigating public opinion and bureaucratic judgment. Their wedding was for them and the handful of people who actually mattered. Diego served as best man. Marcus's daughters attended, representing their father's memory. Colleagues from Lena's task force mixed with ex-offenders Adrian had helped reintegrate, creating a reception that blended law enforcement and formerly incarcerated in ways that would have seemed impossible a decade earlier. To impossible alliances, Lena toasted, to second chances, to the man who saved my life and then built something worth living. To the woman who refused to die, Adrian replied, who exposed corruption despite impossible odds, who somehow saw past the criminal to the person underneath. They built a life together that defied every convention. Lena continued leading her anti-corruption task force. Adrian expanded his re-entry program to serve more ex-offenders. They bought a house in a neighborhood that had once been part of Adrian's criminal territory, but had since been rebuilt into something legitimate and thriving. 7 years after Adrian's release, a documentary filmmaker approached them about telling their story. Adrian's initial instinct was to refuse. Rehashing the past for public consumption felt exploitative, but Lena saw opportunity. People need to understand that change is possible, she argued, that someone can commit terrible crimes and still become someone worthy of second chances. Your story shows that redemption isn't fantasy, it's real work over sustained time. They agreed to participate with conditions: complete editorial control, involvement of Marcus's family, focus on corruption exposure rather than sensationalizing criminal activity. The resulting documentary premiered at a film festival 2 years later, generating intense discussion about criminal justice reform, police corruption, and the possibility of genuine rehabilitation. Adrian watched himself on screen, the crime boss who'd built an empire, the prisoner serving time, the ex-offender rebuilding his life. It felt like watching a stranger, someone he'd been but no longer was. The man who'd found Lena in that alley seemed impossibly young despite being in his 40s, impossibly certain despite facing impossible choices. Any regrets? Lena asked as credits rolled. About making the documentary? No. About the choices that led to needing redemption? Adrian considered. I regret the harm I caused, the lives I damaged in building my empire. But I don't regret what came after, the exposure of corruption, the years learning who I could become, finding you. The path was terrible, but the destination makes it meaningful. That's very philosophical for a former crime boss. I had 15 years in prison to get philosophical. Plus, you married me for my depth. I married you for your humanity in impossible circumstances. The philosophy is bonus. 10 years after Adrian's release, Marcus Chen's Memorial Foundation had grown into a major force for change, providing scholarships, funding community programs, supporting families affected by crime and corruption. Adrian served as chairman, directing resources with the same strategic thinking he'd once used for criminal enterprises, but toward purposes that actually mattered. At the annual gala celebrating the Foundation's work, Marcus's wife gave a speech that brought the room to tears. "My husband died because of corruption he had no part in creating. He was collateral damage in a war between criminals and corrupt officials, an innocent man caught in crossfire. For years, I was angry at the system that failed him, at the people whose choices cost his life, at the unfairness of losing someone who'd done nothing wrong." She paused, composing herself. "But this foundation, the work it supports, the lives it changes, this is Marcus's legacy. Not his death, but what came after. The man standing beside me," she gestured to Adrian, "was my husband's friend for 20 years. He made terrible choices that contributed to the corruption that killed Marcus. But he also made a different choice, to expose that corruption regardless of cost, to honor Marcus's memory through genuine change, to spend the rest of his life helping prevent others from making his mistakes. That's the legacy that matters. That's how we honor those we've lost." Adrian accepted the recognition with humility that would have been impossible 15 years earlier. The crime boss who'd valued power above everything had become someone who understood that real power came from service, from helping others, from building something that lasted beyond personal profit. 15 years after Adrian's release, Lena retired from the police department. She'd spent over 30 years in law enforcement, 15 of those leading anti-corruption efforts that had transformed department oversight and accountability. Her farewell ceremony was attended by hundreds, officers whose careers she'd protected, reformers she'd inspired, citizens whose trust in police she'd helped restore. "Detective Cross represents everything we should aspire to be," the commissioner said. "Dedicated to justice regardless of personal cost, refusing to accept that corruption is inevitable, building systems that protect integrity instead of enabling abuse. Her legacy will shape this department for generations." In her retirement speech, Lena spoke about the alley where everything had changed. 15 years ago, I was investigating corruption within this department. My own partner shot me and left me to die rather than let me expose what I'd found. I should have died in that alley. Instead, an unlikely ally saved my life and helped me complete my investigation. That investigation led to reforms we're still implementing today, to accountability we're still building, to recognition that police corruption isn't acceptable regardless of how systemic it seems. She paused. "I'm often asked whether I regret the choices that led to being shot, to nearly dying, to exposing colleagues I'd worked alongside for years. My answer is always the same. I regret that corruption existed to expose, but I'll never regret choosing truth over survival. That's what this badge represents. That's what every officer should aspire to embody." After the ceremony, Adrian found Lena surrounded by well-wishers and admirers. He waited patiently until the crowd thinned, then offered his arm. "Ready to start the next chapter?" he asked. "More than ready. 30 years of fighting corruption is enough. Time to focus on building instead of just exposing what's broken." They'd made plans, travel to places neither had seen, volunteer work with organizations serving marginalized communities, time for themselves after decades of service to larger causes. The future stretched ahead, undefined and full of possibility. 20 years after Adrian found Lena bleeding in that alley, they returned to the spot together. The city had placed a memorial marker, not officially sanctioned but tolerated by authorities, commemorating the location where corruption was exposed. Flowers appeared regularly, left by citizens who saw the site as symbolic of truth triumphing over institutional decay. 20 years, Lena said, reading the weathered plaque someone had installed. "Feels like a lifetime and a moment simultaneously. Multiple lifetimes, really. The criminal I was, the prisoner I became, the person I am now." Adrian squeezed her hand. "Thank you for refusing to die here, for surviving long enough to change everything. Thank you for choosing humanity over self-preservation, for saving someone who should have been your enemy, for proving that redemption isn't impossible, just difficult." They stood in the alley as the city moved around them, people heading to work, traffic flowing through streets that had once belonged to criminal enterprises but now served legitimate purposes. The neighborhoods that had been blighted by corruption and crime had been rebuilt into thriving communities. The systems that had enabled corruption had been reformed, though the work remained perpetually incomplete. But change had happened. real, measurable change that improved lives and restored trust. And it had started here, in this alley, when a dying cop and a crime boss made impossible choices that defied every logical calculation. "Do you think we made a difference?" Lena asked. "In the grand scheme, with all the corruption still existing, all the problems still unsolved?" "I think we proved that individuals can choose differently, that systems can be challenged, that corruption isn't inevitable just because it's systematic." Adrian turned to face her. 20 years ago, I had an empire built on accepting that corruption was unchangeable. Today, I have a life built on changing what I can and accepting what I can't. That's difference enough. Philosophical again. "I'm old. I'm allowed to be philosophical." They left the alley hand in hand, two people who'd survived impossible circumstances and built something genuine from the ashes. Behind them, the memorial marker caught afternoon light. A permanent reminder that sometimes the most important choices happen in moments that seem insignificant. A dying cop refusing to surrender. A crime boss choosing humanity. An alliance that made no sense but changed everything. 20 years later, their story had become legend. Taught in police academies as example of dedication to truth, referenced in criminal justice courses as proof of rehabilitation's possibility. Celebrated by citizens as evidence that corruption could be exposed and defeated. But for Adrian and Lena, it remained simply the story of how they'd found each other in darkness and chosen to walk toward light together. No matter how difficult the path, no matter how many obstacles appeared, no matter how many people said their alliance was impossible, they'd proven that sometimes the impossible becomes possible through simple choice, to save instead of abandon, to expose instead of accept, to build instead of destroy, to believe that people can change and systems can improve, and the future doesn't have to repeat the past. In a city once ruled by fear and corruption, where criminal empires had seemed unshakable and police corruption had felt inevitable, two unlikely allies had proved that change doesn't come from accepting how things are. It comes from the courage to choose how things could be, no matter the cost. And that courage, that impossible, improbable, defiant courage, had changed everything.